During the mid-1980s, 3 police forces across the south of England launched a massive manhunt for a serial rapist and serial killer who'd engaged in a 4-year-long crime spree between 1982 and 1986, targeting lone women walking from train stations in London and the surrounding areas, who were then subjected to horrific sexual assaults and eventually murdered. Later, it was discovered there were actually 2 men responsible for these horrific crimes: lifelong friends John Duffy and Robert Mulcahy, sadistic sexual psychopaths who'd begun by torturing and killing animals as children, to stalking the rail network as adults, brutalising innocent, defenceless women. These evil men were likely responsible for at least 33 rapes and 3 murders, with many of the surviving victims describing Duffy's staring, cold, soulless eyes. He later describes his crimes as, quote, "a bit of a joke, a bit of a game." Their campaign of terror came to an end in 1986 with the arrest of Duffy, who was caught with the help of criminal profiling. But it would not be until 1999 that Mulcahy was arrested, and only because John Duffy gave up the name of his accomplice after over a decade of silence. The crimes of Duffy and Mulcahy, dubbed the railway rapists and railway killers by the press, are an example of the horror that occurs when 2 twisted men form a partnership of evil. Welcome to Evil Among Us. John Francis Duffy was born on the 29th of November 1958 into an Irish Catholic household, and he grew up in the district of Kilburn in northwest London. He's described as being raised in a responsible and loving Catholic household by his parents John Sr. and Philomena Duffy. Whilst growing up, he sang in the choir and was an altar boy at the local Catholic church. There are no indicators of abuse or neglect in his childhood, so his reported history, at least on paper, is not in line with those of other serial killers. However, it's also important to reinforce this doesn't mean that there weren't any issues in the home, just they didn't come to the attention of the authorities. Regardless, as will be seen, John Duffy was a man plagued with feelings of inadequacy, whose life, from childhood to adulthood, was about victimizing others in order to make himself feel powerful. John Duffy was a shy and awkward child who was bullied from a young age. This ramped up significantly when he joined Haverstock Secondary School in Chalk Farm in North London, where he was picked on repeatedly by the bigger boys. He was later described as a loner by fellow classmates, a boy with no friends, who used to spend his break times walking around the school grounds wearing a duffel coat with the hood pulled up, regardless of the season. Duffy was a small child and, as an adult, was only 5 foot 4 inches tall. In addition, had extremely bad acne as a child, which left his skin badly pockmarked as an adult. I've no doubt that these physical issues, along with his strange behaviour, made him a target for the abuse of his peers, but also, inevitably, reinforced his feelings of inadequacy. However, soon after starting secondary school, Duffy met another disenfranchised and isolated child named David Mulcahy. Little is reported about David Mulcahy. He was born on the 25th of May 1959 in Hampstead Jumbo Hospital in London and, like Duffy, was raised in an Irish Catholic household. His parents were John and Joan Mulcahy, and he had 2 sisters, one older, one younger. John and Joan were in the alcohol industry, running off licenses and also running pubs. In a letter written from prison, Mulcahy described his mother as very caring and loving, whilst his father was, quote, more of his generation and that men should be men, so he kept his feelings close. He would, however, be there for me whenever I needed him. So again, Mulcahy apparently grew up in a happy and loving household. However, he soon began to break the law. He began with minor offences, stealing sweets from shops when he was around 8 years old. This progressed to him stealing cars and joyriding when he was around 12. It was clear from a young age that Mulcahy was a boy who thought the rules didn't apply to him, but he also seemed to get off on the excitement of committing crimes. He had trouble adapting to life at Haverstock Secondary School and, like John Duffy, was bullied by the older children. This seemed predominantly due to his small height, as he was far shorter than his peers. However, he would eventually end up towering over John Duffy in adulthood. It's not clear exactly when John Duffy and David Mulcahy met, but it was likely when both were around 11 or 12 years old, and they quickly formed an unshakable bond, which seems to be based on banding together against the world. Each drew something from the other. Duffy was quiet, shy, and looked to Mulcahy for guidance. Mulcahy was the exact opposite of Duffy. He was outgoing, loud, and reckless, and appeared to enjoy having the attention of someone who would follow him around wherever he went. Although John Duffy's photo is most associated with this case, as will be covered in this video, David Mulcahy was clearly the leader, the more dangerous of the two, and also the one who began showing violent, sadistic tendencies at an early age. Within 2 years of the pair meeting, the first warning signs were obvious when, aged 13, David Mulcahy was caught at school, battering a hedgehog with a cricket bat and stamping on its head. Duffy was stood, watching this unfold. A report of this incident stated, quote, "Teachers found David covered in blood. John was next to him, laughing." Again, the leader seemed to be Mulcahy. He got a sadistic thrill from violence. This made him feel powerful, and Duffy soon found that he too enjoyed the feeling he got from victimizing other living things. Behind closed doors, Mulcahy also enjoyed victimizing his family members, and is reported to have tied up his 12-year-old cousin, hand and foot, and thrown them into a bathtub filled with ice-cold water. He then began laughing and taking pictures of his cousin as he gasped for breath. Around this same time, the pair became interested in girls, but due to their behaviour, they were unsuccessful in getting their attention. This instilled in both of them a hatred of women, which would dominate both of their lives. However, as I'll return to later, I think the hatred of women that Mulcahy had, and also possibly Duffy, was something that started at a very young age. His experience as a teenager, being rejected, only built on this. It didn't create it. The pair fed off each other. There was nothing wrong with them. Women were the problem. And they soon began skulking around Hampstead Heath, hiding in bushes wearing masks, and jumping out on couples in the park. They would also shoot passers-by with an air rifle. Almost always, their targets were lone women or girls. Whilst they didn't act on their fantasies of raping women until years later, both John Duffy and David Mulcahy spoke about this at length, starting from when they were around 12 years old. Prior to the pair leaving school at the age of 16, in around 1974, they made a pact that neither of them would grass on the other to the police, a promise that John Duffy would keep for years, enabling David Mulcahy to escape justice for over a decade. Both men learnt trades. Mulcahy became a builder and Duffy became a carpenter, but they continued to commit crimes together, including burglaries, car thefts, and arsons. The pair remained inseparable and would continue to discuss their fantasies about raping women, having complete power and dominance over them. And in 1976, they took their first steps to turning their fantasies into reality. In the summer of 1976, David Mulcahy, at this point 17 years old, fell out with a woman who he was doing building work for. What specifically occurred is unclear, but Mulcahy was enraged. How dare a woman do this to him? He described his desire to, quote, teach her a lesson, and he suggested to John Duffy that they could achieve this by breaking into her property and then raping her. The pair broke in when this woman was out one evening and lay in wait in the dark for her return. However, she didn't. She decided to stay at a friend's house overnight. A few months later, the pair were skulking the streets of Notting Hill when they saw a woman who Mulcahy decided needed to be punished because she seemed, quote, stuck up. She was stalked and her property identified. It was determined that she lived alone, and the pair planned to break into her home and rape her. But on the day of the crime, they were thwarted when the woman returned home with a male friend. Whilst these attempts were unsuccessful, the pair were buzzing. They found they enjoyed the thrill of the hunt, picking out victims and planning what they were going to do to these poor women. They got off on seeing a random woman and then deciding they were going to destroy her life and demonstrate to them how powerful they were. No doubt they masturbated to fantasies of these acts. With Mulcahy especially, he wanted to see the terror in his victims' eyes. The pair decided to engage in a campaign of rape across London and the surrounding counties, and they spent the next 5.5 years meticulously planning every detail, including compiling a rape kit. In 1980, John Duffy obtained a job as a carpenter with British Rail, and he began to acquire an encyclopedic knowledge of the rail network and
and would specifically look out for isolated stations, which were poorly lit, where predators could hide, waiting for victims. The London Underground and Overground rail network is an engineering marvel, but for every main station, like Paddington or King's Cross, there were 20 desolate and isolated stations on the outskirts of the network. Even today, with LED lighting and CCTV covering every station, it's easy to feel unsafe stepping off a train and walking from one of these stations late at night. This was far worse in the 1980s, where CCTV cameras were not common and mainly positioned in the centre of London. It was the perfect hunting ground. Whilst their reign of terror against lone women began in 1982, both men were victimising women before this point and displaying their disgusting misogyny. With regards to David Mulcahy, he married a woman called Sandra in 1978, but it's clear, behind closed doors, he utterly dominated and controlled this core woman. We know this due to his behaviour around colleagues at a minicab firm he used to work at part-time for a little bit of extra money in his late teens into his 20s. He would brag that his wife, quote, knew her place, and that she was completely submissive to him in the bedroom and would do whatever he wanted, without question. A female controller at the cab firm later stated, quote, his attitude to women was disgusting. If he had anything to say about them, they were either slags or sluts. He'd refer to that slag who makes the tea. If he got angry, it would be that fucking slag or slut. He liked women to be at the kitchen sink, where they should be, or in bed. Once, he came behind me and got me round the neck, saying, how does it feel? Are you scared? I told him to let go. He went out laughing. I've no doubt that Mulcahy, given his attitude, would regularly rape his wife. He was a man who likely didn't understand the word no. However, the horror that John Duffy's wife suffered is a matter of public record. Duffy met his wife Margaret Mustafa in 1980, and, after a brief courtship, they married at Camden Registry Office in June of that year. Margaret would later recall the horror that she endured at the hands of Duffy, with her stating, quote, he used a handkerchief to try and suffocate me. He had one hand on my throat and the other trying to force it down my throat. This behaviour would often be whilst Duffy was raping Margaret, with him tying her up and forcing himself on her. She stated that he only appeared to be able to get aroused and perform sexually if she was crying and fighting against him. If she was passive, he would quickly lose his erection. Things escalated further in the spring of 1982, when John Duffy found out he was infertile. This was a massive blow to him, and he took his frustration out on Margaret, beating and raping her as punishment for this. In his mind, it was her fault that he could not father children. This galvanised his hatred of women even further, but also, no doubt, made him feel even more inadequate than he did before. Duffy then quit his job with British Rail and spent his time watching violent horror films and kung fu movies. Around this time, Duffy became interested in karate in the army and would often speak to Mulcahy about how the pair could incapacitate and kidnap a woman without leaving a trace. Both men also became fascinated with knives, and John Duffy was later found to own a copy of the Anarchist's Cookbook, a notorious work of literature first published in 1971, written by an American teenager called William Powell, at the height of the counterculture movement in response to the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War. This book included instructions on making explosives and drugs, but of particular interest to Duffy were the pages that described how to incapacitate someone with your bare hands. In addition to this, Duffy read books on guerrilla warfare. In August 1982, Margaret left Duffy to escape the abuse, and although they reunited sometime later, the floodgates opened. Finding out he was infertile and his wife daring to leave him compounded Duffy's hatred of women, but also his feelings of inadequacy. He was going to make women pay. He was going to show then how powerful he really was. And so, in October 1982, the reign of terror of John Duffy and David Mulcahy began. There seems to be some discrepancy between reports as to when the first rape occurred. Some reports say June 1982, some say October of that year. However, the majority seem to cite the latter date, which I'll conclude is most accurate for this video. So, by the time of the first attack, John Duffy and David Mulcahy were prepared. They had a rape kit, which included barrack fathers, knives, and tape to gag and blindfold their victims. The pair had heard a stolen tape of the song Thriller by Michael Jackson from a car they'd broken into, and they would listen to this on the way to an area to look for a victim. Singing along to the lyrics became part of their pre-rape ritual. Duffy later described this as follows, quote, "We would have balaclavas and knives. We used to call it hunting. We did it as a bit of a joke, a bit of a game." Their first victim was a 21-year-old woman who was walking home from a party in Kilburn, in northwest London. She reached an isolated area of road where she was pounced upon by the two men, who dragged her into a garden. She had sticky tape placed around her mouth to stifle her screams and was blindfolded before these stripped and raped by both men. The victim later recalled that one of the men, almost certainly Mulcahy, announced to her that he had a knife in his hand. She was totally under his control, but he wanted to see the terror in her face. Over the next 12 months, at least 18 women were raped near various railway stations, mainly in North London, but also extending out to counties just outside the capital. It's likely that Duffy and Mulcahy were responsible for most, if not all, of these attacks. This included an attempted rape in March 1983, where Duffy Mulcahy attacked a 29-year-old restaurant manager who was walking near Finchley Road railway station in North London. However, she bit Mulcahy's hand and managed to escape. By the end of 1983, the Metropolitan Police were alarmed for the spate of rapes and attempted rapes, which clearly showed a pattern, and they were convinced they were the work of a serial rapist, or potentially a pair or group of rapists. They set up Operation Heart, the largest manhunt since search for the Yorkshire Ripper in the 1970s and early 1980s. The Heart computer system was also launched to compile information on the thousands of men that they investigated about the spate of rapes. However, this was in the time before DNA and CCTV. The investigation involved thousands of man-hours to gather evidence. It was slow going. Duffy and Mulcahy's plan was paying off. There were no clear descriptions of the rapists, but an emergent feature was victims reporting that one of the men had pockmarked skin and cold, laser-focused eyes. In the meantime, Duffy and Mulcahy were buzzing. They felt invincible, and each justified the other's behaviour. Mulcahy told Duffy that they would never be caught, and that, quote, "rape is a natural thing for a man to do." The frequency of their attacks increased in 1984. This included on January the 20th of this year, when a 32-year-old American social worker was attacked on Barnes Common in South London. Duffy and Mulcahy were in the area, decorating Duffy's parents' home, and during a break, decided to hunt in the local area for a woman to rape. This one was ambushed, blindfolded and bound, stripped and raped. On June the 30th, 1984, the pair were back in North London, hiding in the darkness outside West Hampstead railway station. They approached and grabbed a 23-year-old woman who had just stepped off a train and was walking home. They dragged her into the undergrowth. She later reported, quote, "They had a knife and said they would cut me if I didn't do as I was told. All I could say was, 'Please don't hurt me.'" After raping her, this evil pair then drove past in their getaway car, still wearing their balaclavas, and were heard laughing and joking about whether they should offer her a lift. A month later, on July the 8th, 1984, Duffy and Mulcahy dragged a 22-year-old woman into some undergrowth while she walked home along Highgate West Hill in North London. Luckily, this was seen by someone in the neighbouring house, and they called the police. The sound of the sirens caused both men to flee, and the woman escaped. She was comforted by a neighbour and was absolutely terrified, and her wrist was still bound with tape. This was removed and stored, and years later would be a crucial part of evidence in convicting David Mulcahy. Just a week later, two 18-year-old Danish au pairs were attacked on Hampstead Heath. The pair came close to being caught in October 1984, when the car they were driving in was pulled over by the police. In the vehicle was stolen building equipment and a balaclava. Mulcahy said that he wore the balaclava when he was working on dusty plastering, and he was believed. The men received fines for the stolen goods. They went to ground for 3 months, and next struck again on January the 26th, 1985, when they fought a 20-year-old au pair under a canal bridge near New Cross Station in southeast London, where she was bound and raped. The pair then raped or attempted to rape 4 further women around Hampstead Heath, in January, February, and twice in March 1985. In July 1985, 3 women were raped in a single night in Hampstead and Hendon. The pair were out most nights hunting for victims, and the fact they'd not been stopped emboldened them. They were invincible. Duffy's level of invincibility is shown by his behaviour towards his wife Margaret, who he once told, quote, "I raped a girl tonight, and it was all your fault." In August 1995, Duffy again raped Margaret, and this time she called the police and left him for good. Some sources seem to suggest that Duffy was convicted for this, but considering he remained on the streets, I find this unlikely. I'm more inclined to believe, as some reports say, this didn't result in a prosecution, but did lead to Duffy's name being brought to police attention and included on the Operation Heart database as a person of interest. As I said before, this was the computer system that had been set up to find the serial rapists operating in London at the time. Duffy's name was one of 1,999 other potential suspects. I've read that Mulcahy was also interviewed as person of interest as part of Operation Heart, but was released. The attention of the police didn't stop the pair. I imagine they thought they were too clever to get caught. In September 1985, a woman was brutally raped near High Barnet railway station in North London. She described one of her attackers, which matched John Duffy to a T, and he was arrested and brought in. On the 2nd of December 1985, he was put in an identity crate, but due to still being traumatised by the attack, the victim was unable to pick him out, and Duffy was released. This was the last chance to stop the pair. Less than a month later, they would escalate to murder. By the middle of 1985, David Mulcahy was no longer gaining the same level of sexual arousal from the attacks. Several victims describe how he'd lost his erection when trying to rape them, and him blaming these women for this, referring to them as, quote, "bitches and slags." In order to complete these horrific acts, David Mulcahy began to increase the sadistic nature of his behaviour, including running a knife along his victim's body or lips, and saying to one that he would, quote, "gouge out her eyes and slice off her ears and nipples if she failed to perform oral sex on him to his satisfaction." According to later reports, it was David Mulcahy who suggested escalating or offending. He wanted to rape, torment, and then murder women. He wanted to exert this ultimate control over them, watch the life go out of their eyes. This was the only way this pathetic man could get aroused and achieve sexual release. John Duffy was apparently satisfied with continuing to just rape women, but he had no objection in helping his friend achieve his fancies. I mean, these women were simply objects. Raped them, killed them, it was all the same. Their first victim was 19-year-old Alison Day, a young woman who, during the afternoon of the 29th of December 1985, took a train from her home in Hornchurch in Essex to see her fiancé in London. She got off the train at Hackney Bridge station in East London and began to walk to the printing firm that her fiancé worked at. She was unaware that she was being watched by 2 dangerous predators. Duffy and Mulcahy had been driving around, looking for victims, going to various railway stations on the prowl. They eventually ended up outside Hackney Bridge train station. Alice's route took her down a darkened towpath, and it was at this point that the pair struck. The men approached at speed, overcowering her before she could react, and she was then dragged to some snow-covered plain fields on the banks of the River Lee. Both Duffy and Mulcahy rode to Alison. She was then either pushed or fell into the freezing cold river. John Duffy later said that he pulled Alison out of the water. David Mulcahy ripped off Alison's blouse and tore it into 3 strips. 2 of these were used to bind her hand and foot, whilst he roped her again. The 3rd piece was intended to be used to strangle her. Duffy later recalled that Alison was pleading for her life, with her saying, quote, "I won't tell anyone. Please don't hurt me." However, we don't describe watching Mulcahy strangle Alison. He used a technique known as the Spanish windlass to end Alison's life. This involved him placing the strip of blouse around her neck, placing a stick between her neck and the ligature, and twisting it, tightening it around her throat. Duffy said that Mulcahy initially claimed that he killed Alison because she might recognise them, but he later said, quote, "David actually enjoyed it, saying it gave him power, the decision over life and death." Stones were placed in Alison's sheepskin coat, wearing her body down, and she was then thrown back into the water. Her remains were found 17 days later, on the 15th of January 1986, floating in the river, still with her hands and feet bound. This murder was noted by the Operation Heart team, who continued to investigate the spate of rapes across the capital. But the link between the rapes and this murder was not initially made, and the cases were dealt with separately. However, by the point of the murder of Alison, the police involved in Operation Heart were convinced that the rapes they were investigating were being committed by two men. 4 months later, the pair struck again, moving their hunting ground outside of London to the neighbouring county of Surrey. Their victim was 15-year-old Marty Tamboza. She was the daughter of a Dutch businessman and had lived in the village of West Hawley in Surrey, which is southwest of London. On the afternoon of the 17th of April 1986, Marty got on her bike, intending to ride the short distance to the local sweet shop near East Horsley railway station. She was due to go on holiday the next day, and so wanted to buy some sweets for the trip. Duffy and Mulcahy were skulking in the area, and they'd been scoping out East Horsley train station, a remote and rural location, and they were watching, from some woods nearby, the same woods that Marty cycled through to get her sweets. They watched her cycle past, and knowing she would likely cycle back the same way, lay in wait. Once she'd gone past, Duffy ran a length of wire across the path, at chest height between two posts. They then hid in the undergrowth, waiting for Marty. Whilst waiting, they spoke about what they intended to do to her, with Duffy'd been promised that he could, quote, go first, raping her. Soon, Marty was riding back, and unfortunately she didn't see the wire and rode straight into it, throwing her from her bike. Once she was on the ground, the pair emerged, and after propping her bike against a fence to avoid suspicion, Marty was marched at knife point across some fields, stripped, bound, and gagged with her own sock, before being raped by Duffy whilst Mulcahy watched. At that point, Duffy claimed that Mulcahy lost his temper, stating, quote, he was becoming very aggressive, hyper, shouting at the girl. He then raised his fists and hit the girl. She crumpled to the floor. She was struck on the head at the side. It was a swinging blow. I noticed he had a rock in his hand or a stone. She just crumpled up and fell on the floor. I believe she was unconscious. Mulcahy then ripped off Marty's belt and looped it around her throat. Duffy later recalled Mulcahy saying, quote, I did the last one. You will do this one. Duffy continued, he passed me the belt. It had a piece of stick through it, which was twisted, and he gave it to me in my hand. I actually started twisting it while David turned away. I think I just got caught up in it. It's very difficult to explain. I just continued twisting until she was dead. The pair left the scene, but returned a short time later, where they stuck paper tissues into Marty's vagina and set them on fire in another attempt to destroy her body and destroy any forensic evidence. They were unsuccessful, and her body did not catch light fully, but there was extensive burning to her genital area. When Marty didn't return home, her frantic parents called Surrey police and reported her missing, and a search was soon started. The next day, the 18th of April 1986, two men foraging in the woods came across Marty's beaten, violated and burnt body. Importantly, it was found that Marty had a neck fracture, which was concluded to have likely been caused by a karate chop. Surrey police began to investigate this murder, and they uncovered some vital evidence. This included a witness who saw two men in sheepskin coats lurking near East Horsley train station prior to the murder. Another witness described seeing a man in the area with, quote, chilling, laser-like staring eyes. Semen wasn't covered from Marty's body, which showed that the perpetrator had type A blood. Also, they noticed the string that was used to bind Marty was very unusual. It was called somyan and was a rare type of string, not made from cord or thread, but instead made out of paper. The use of a stick to twist a ligature in this case quickly meant that this murder was linked to that of Alison Day 4 months before, and eventually to the spate of rapes in London and the surrounding areas. However, before progress could be made on this investigation, a third young woman would lose her life. Her name was Anne Locke. At the time of her death in May 1986, she was just 29 years old. She'd just come back from her honeymoon in the Seychelles having gotten married in April, just a month before her death. Anne worked for London Weekend Television as a secretary, and on Sunday the 18th of May 1986, she'd been working late, and so didn't get the train in London until 8:30 p.m. She travelled to the station near her home, Brookman's Park in Hertfordshire, arriving there just before 10 p.m. What Anne couldn't have known was that she was about to walk into a trap. Both John Duffy and David Mulcahy had been scoping out the station for several hours, looking for victims, when they came across a female bike in the bicycle shed at the station. This was Anne's, which she'd used to ride the mile or so from her home to get the train when she left for work in the morning. The pair had decided they were going to attack the owner of the bike, and so had dragged a nearby bench across the path, blocking someone from being able to get into the bike shed. The pair then hid in the undergrowth and waited. This is what confronted Anne when she walked to the shed to get her bike. The men then pounced, and Anne was never seen alive again. She was marched at knife point to an isolated area, bound with songyam string and stripped. John Duffy later said that he raped Anne and was then throwing the keys to the pair's getaway car by Mulcahy. He then waited in the car, and Mulcahy emerged from the undergrowth saying, quote, "He'd taken care of it." Mulcahy was described as excitable and buzzing and said to Duffy, quote, "Keep your eyes open for another one." It was determined that Anne had choked to death on the sock that had been stuffed into her mouth. An attempt had also been made to set fire to her body, but again this was unsuccessful. Her body unfortunately lay undiscovered for 2 months. Anne's disappearance was publicised widely, and the authorities quickly linked her murder to that of Alison Day and Marty Tamboza. Police forces in Surrey and Hertfordshire set up a joint operation and then joined forces with detectives in London, still working on Operation Heart. The objective of the hundreds of detectives now involved was to catch the man or men responsible for the rapes and murders and bring their reign of terror to an end. By the time of Anne Locke's murder, John Duffy had apparently decided to begin a campaign of rape on his own, that his crimes were sloppy, and the mistakes he made, as well as the help of offender profiling, sealed his fate.
John Duffy was, as I already stated, just one of 1,999 potential suspects on the list compiled by the police, but he quickly became their main person of interest when officers who were part of Operation Heart saw that on the 17th of May 1986, the day before the murder of Anne Locke, John Duffy had been stopped by officers
Lurking outside of North Weald railway station in Essex. He was searched and was found to have on him a butterfly knife, tissues, and a box of matches. He told the officers that the knife was something he used at weekly karate classes. He was released, but the contact noted. The links were made immediately. The presence of tissues in the vagina of Marty Tamboza
and the presence of fractures in her neck, likely caused by someone who knew karate. On the 17th of July 1986, Duffy was called in for questioning by Operation Heart detectives, but arrived with a solicitor and refused to give blood samples. The police were, by this point, sure they had their man. On the 21st of July 1986, the badly decomposed body of Anne Locke was finally discovered by some railway maintenance workers, hidden in the undergrowth near Brookman's Park railway station, the place where she'd been abducted from. Police noted the same somnion string had been used to bind her, therefore linking her murder to the others. This discovery meant the police ramped up the pressure on John Duffy, and they went looking for him to question him again. Duffy, knowing the body had been recovered, went into hiding, but not in the way you may think. A few days after the body of Anne was discovered, John Duffy walked into a psychiatric hospital in North London and claimed that he'd been assaulted by 2 men and lost his memory. He was admitted to the hospital and held under section for almost 4 months. The police were astonished and sceptical, but the doctors refused to give them permission to interview such a vulnerable man on hospital grounds. So the police bided their time. On Tuesday, October the 21st, 1986, John Duffy was released from the hospital. Within hours, he raped a 14-year-old schoolgirl in Watford, 15 miles northwest of central London. Duffy blindfolded this girl, but it slipped, as she was clearly able to see his face. Another important detail is that for some reason, Duffy had his dog with him. Potentially was using the guise of walking his dog to make himself seem less suspicious. However, he made a mistake and called this dog by name, His last victim stated that she overheard the dog's name clearly, Bruce. Finding out that Duffy was now out of hospital, he was put under police surveillance, but unfortunately not in time to save the 14-year-old girl he raped within hours of his release. This was the last rape committed by John Duffy. How many people both he and David Mulcahy actually raped will likely never be known for sure, but an important point, which I've not mentioned so far, which gives an idea of how prolific they were, as well as Duffy's level of callousness and evil, is that he would take souvenirs from each of his victims, specifically a door key. Police would eventually recover 33 of these from John Duffy's property, each one representing a life that he destroyed. The owners of most were never traced. I think it could be assumed that John Duffy didn't start this ritual from the first attack and likely began it later in the sequence. Also, some victims potentially didn't have their keys on them, or he was unable to access them. In this respect, these trophies likely represent a fraction of the total number of victims of John Duffy and David Mulcahy, making the pair two of the most prolific rapists the country has ever seen. The police were certain that John Duffy was their man, but they were concerned about focusing on the wrong suspect. If they arrested the wrong man, the real rapist might slip away, never to be caught. In order to get reassurance they were on the right track, the police turned to the field of psychology, specifically offender profiling, to help them. By the time of this case, offender profiling had been used successfully in the US by the FBI for around 10 years. However, this area of study was still in its infancy in the UK. There were only a handful of psychologists who were trying to work out personality and behavioural characteristics of offenders based upon an analysis of the crimes they committed. One of these was a man called Professor David Cantor, who was a professor of applied psychology at the University of Surrey. He was renowned within British academia as an expert in behavioural science. He had never worked with the police before, and in fact, this was the first occasion where a police force in the UK had sought assistance from a psychologist to help them build a profile of an offender. Professor Cantor also had a particular field of interest, geographical profiling. This is an area of study where it's believed that a serial offender's home can be determined from the areas where crimes occurred. To summarise, Professor Cantor proposed that, initially, serial offenders begin to commit crimes in locations they're comfortable with, and then, as they become more confident, travel further afield. So if you plotted a sequence of offences, initial crimes are more likely to be clustered around or close to the offender's home. Professor Cantor was given every scrap of information on the case and produced a 17-point profile on the character, behaviour and possible location of a serial rapist and murderer the police were trying to catch. It's important to know that at this point, whilst the police were confident there was more than one man involved, they didn't have the evidence to pursue this line of inquiry, and so were focused on apprehending a single individual, which, if there was only one offender, would bring the reign of terror to an end. If there were two, it would hopefully break up this partnership and reduce the chances of further crimes, whilst they sought out any accomplices. It was found that 13 of the points on Professor Cantor's profile matched John Duffy perfectly. This included identifying where he lived, in Kilburn in North London, the location of the first confirmed rape, and also at the epicentre of the space of attacks between 1982 and 1985. The profile also identified his physically small stature, interest in martial arts, fascination with weapons, and trophy-taking. When Professor Cantor's profile was fed into the computer and programmed to sift through the list of suspects, 1,999 names were whittled down to just one: John Duffy. On the 26th of November 1986, John Duffy was seen following a woman in a secluded park, and the decision was made to arrest him. Detectives who searched his home found hardcore pornography, martial arts videos and magazines, and several martial arts weapons. They also found his trophies, the keys from his victims. While searching, they were greeted by a dog, called Bruce, which matched the name that his last rape victim had heard him call. At his mother's home, the police made a breakthrough. Hidden under some stairs was a ball of some yarn string, which was found to match the bindings found on the bodies of Anne Locke and Marty Tamboza. Duffy's blood type was also found to match the semen sample in Marty's vagina. Fibres found on Duffy's clothes matched those recovered from the body of Alison Day. So, the police were able to link John Duffy to all three murders. With regards to the rapes, a combination of victim identification of Duffy and forensic evidence from semen samples meant that he could be linked to 7 offences.
John Duffy was presented with all the evidence, but pathetically, he still claimed to have amnesia from his fictitious attack by 2 men months before, so he essentially played dumb. He was confronted with the fact the police knew he was not working alone, but he refused to give up the name of his accomplice. On the 8th of November 1986, John Duffy was charged with 3 counts of murder and 7 counts of rape, and remanded into prison to await his day in court. David Mulcahy was also arrested and brought in on suspicion of rape and murder, but he simply sat there, smiling smugly, denying everything. The police didn't have enough evidence against him, and so they were forced to release this dangerous predator back into the world. He would remain a free man for another 12 years. John Duffy pleaded not guilty to all offences, claiming that he couldn't remember any crimes due to amnesia. At his trial, which began in February 1988 at the Old Bailey in London, he had no answer for the forensic and eyewitness evidence, as some of the most damning testimony came from his former wife, Margaret Mustafa, who told the court about the years of sexual violence she'd been subjected to at the hands of this monster. Unfortunately, some of the rape cases fell apart, as the victims were too terrified to testify at the trial. On the 26th of February 1988, John Duffy was found guilty of 5 counts of rape, as well as the murders of 19-year-old Alice Day and 15-year-old schoolgirl Marty Tamboza. He was found not guilty of the murder of 29-year-old Anne Locke. Apparently, the case against him was considered not strong enough, as forensic evidence was hard to obtain from her body due to the state of decomposition. The judge then sentenced him. For the crimes he committed, John Duffy was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 30 years. However, the Home Secretary later reviewed his case and decided that John Duffy's sentence needed to be replaced with a whole life order, meaning he will never be released and will die behind bars. At no point during his police interrogation did John Duffy break his vow of silence regarding his friend, David Mulcahy, and Mulcahy no doubt felt he'd gotten away with his campaign of terror. In amongst raping and murdering women, Mulcahy had apparently developed a passion for roller skating, and he was interviewed in 1987 by the BBC, the year after Duffy's arrest, about his new hobby. I'll play the clip of this interview.
Dave's a minicab driver in London, but should manage the promenade without an A to Z.
It's madness, but it's just so enjoyable. It's like a drug you can't give up. Once you start and you get into it, that's it, you're hooked.
But if you've got a cab, which you drive around under, what do you want wheels on your feet for?
It's more fun. A cab's conventional, boring. This, interesting. But I'm 28. I'm growing old. But I still can't stop skating.
I find clips like this so interesting, to see how the person moves, how they speak, but also how ordinary these evil people look. They don't have horns or have murderer tattooed on their foreheads, and that's a scary thing. People who do these horrific things look completely normal, just like you and me. Anyway, it's clear in this interview that Mulcahy is happy as Larry. There was no way the police would ever catch him. David Mulcahy then went back to his life and, to the best of the police's knowledge, didn't attack any more women. This, I've no doubt, was a calculated move. Mulcahy knew he'd sailed too close to the wind, and the police would be watching him. If he wanted to remain free, he needed to wear his mask of sanity. He went on to father 4 children, and years after Duffy's conviction, he was before the court again for beating one of his sons. He avoided prison on this occasion. In this respect, I have little doubt that David Mulcahy turned his sadistic need to abuse and violate others inwards, and his behaviour was confined behind closed doors, and invariably included continuing to victimise his wife. The beginning of the end for David Mulcahy began in 1997 due to 2 separate sequences of events. Firstly, police in London were dealing with the case of another serial rapist who began committing crimes in mid-1996. One of the officers investigating this case also worked on the case of John Duffy and saw striking similarities between the 2 sets of offences. This was entirely coincidental, but it led to the officer revisiting the evidence in the Duffy case to see whether this new rapist could potentially be the elusive accomplice they knew existed but had not been able to name. It was then found that a huge blunder had been made
with the original evidence. It was found that the piece of tape recovered from the wrist of the 22-year-old woman who was attacked on July the 8th, 1984, whilst walking along Highgate West Hill in North London, had not been tested for fingerprints. This was promptly done, and David Mulcahy's fingerprints were discovered. This was a staggering oversight, which meant that Mulcahy could have potentially been stopped earlier in his crime spree, before he escalated to murder. At around this same time, in 1997, while serving his sentence at Whitemoor Prison, John Duffy's amnesia suddenly disappeared. He began seeing a psychologist called Dr. Jenny Cutler, whom he began to speak about his crimes with. He stated that he wanted to make a full confession, as the memory of his crimes were causing him nightmares and he wished to unburden himself. He confirmed to her what the police already knew, that he hadn't acted alone. Dr. Cutler asked what prison his accomplice was in, and it was at this point he dropped a bombshell, telling her that he'd never been convicted or imprisoned, and gave his name, David Mulcahy. Duffy added he wanted Mulcahy stopped so that he didn't rape or kill any more women. Dr. Cutler immediately called the police and told them of the confession. So the police now had the beginnings of forensic evidence against David Mulcahy and a confession from John Duffy. The police decided that, whilst they could arrest and potentially convict David Mulcahy for rape, he would likely only receive a short custodial sentence if he was convicted at all, and would be back on the streets, and so they decided to build an airtight case against him to show that he was a serial rapist and murderer. It took time to earn Duffy's trust, but eventually, with the help of Dr. Cutler, by June 1998, he agreed to provide full details to the police. He was moved in secret to a police station in Hertfordshire, and over the space of a week, gave a full confession and explained Mulcahy's role in all of the rapes and the murders. He confirmed what the jury had got wrong, that he'd indeed been involved in the murder of Anne Locke. I said that he gave a full confession. John Duffy explained that he'd raped so many women, he couldn't remember all the details. Running alongside this, the police were now testing all of the available evidence kept since the 1980s for DNA, something the original team didn't have access to. This found a link to David Mulcahy, with his semen being found on the clothing of one of the au pairs that were raped in 1984. By December 1998, the police had almost finished building their case against David Mulcahy, and he was put under round-the-clock surveillance for the next 2 months. They needed to check that he didn't suddenly get spooked and try to flee the country, but also that he didn't attack any more women. Finally, at around 5 a.m. on Wednesday the 3rd of February 1999, the police descended in force on the home of the now 39-year-old David Mulcahy. It was a knock on the door that I think this arrogant psychopath thought would never come. During interview, he was presented with all the evidence and simply denied everything. John Duffy had a grudge against him. How could they take the word of a serial rapist and serial killer? However, the police had spent thousands of man-hours building the case against him, and David Mulcahy was charged with 5 counts of rape, 5 counts of conspiracy to rape, and the murders of Alison Day, Marty Tamboza, and Anne Locke. He was remanded into custody to await his long overdue day in court. Whilst awaiting his trial, it was later reported that David Mulcahy had called a friend of his from prison, laughing and joking and bragging about the fact that he'd been charged with 3 counts of murder. Mulcahy was remorseless to the last. It was clear he thought he was very clever and he could easily wriggle out of this situation. He had his strategy all set. He would claim ignorance of everything and simply portray John Duffy as what he was, a monster. And how can you trust a monster? He clearly had an axe to grind. His trial began at the Old Bailey in London on the 11th of September 2000. The star witness was John Duffy, who gave evidence over the course of 14 days. Duffy had already been before the court to plead guilty to new charges stemming from his confession to the police, including a further 8 rapes, 7 conspiracies to rape, and 2 burglaries with intent to rape. Despite the fact that he'd admitted to the murder of Anne Locke, due to having been acquitted of this crime, he couldn't be retried due to double jeopardy. For these new offences, he was given a further sentence of 12 years in prison, but this was just a token sentence. Ultimately, he was already spending the rest of his life behind bars. John Duffy's statements were damning. He described the murders in detail and every rape he could remember that he and Mulcahy committed. As the trial continued, the smugness of Mulcahy was replaced by panic, knowing that he would likely never see freedom again. On the 2nd of February 2001, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all charges. The same day, David Mulcahy stood before Judge Michael Hyam for sentence. He described Mulcahy's crimes as, quote, sadistic, and added, "For two of you, I've no doubt it was you who derived gratification from the act of killing. These were acts of desolating wickedness. You descended to the depths of depravity in carrying them out." He then sentenced him. David Mulcahy was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 30 years. It's not clear why he too wasn't given a whole life tariff.
John Duffy has apparently faded into the background. He made it clear that he has no intention of appealing his sentence and believes it is fair and just for him to spend the rest of his life in prison. David Mulcahy is a different story. He refused to accept his guilt. He's a man whose whole life was about dominating and controlling others, so it was inevitable that he'd make a nuisance of himself. In 2014, he received compensation of £515 after suing the prison service due to one of his packages which was sent to him being damaged. In 2015, he demanded that the Metropolitan Police compile every scrap of evidence against him, so about 6,000 documents, and send them to him for his appeal. The Metropolitan Police told him where to go. Lastly, in 2021, Mulcahy wrote to a filmmaker who made a documentary on his and Duffy's crimes, which read, quote, "I continue to challenge my conviction for one single fact: I did not commit these horrific crimes. It's a very simple thing to say, but a very hard one for people to believe me. The mainstay of the evidence against me is from a self-proclaimed liar. He was my friend, and I should have seen what he was, a monster. Yours truthfully, David Mulcahy." Also, there's a website which was set up in around 2010, protesting Mulcahy's innocence, set up by his friends and family who, I would imagine, he continues to dupe all these years later. Whilst David Mulcahy was not given a whole life tariff, it's inevitable that he, like John Duffy, will never be released again. The railway killers will spend the rest of their lives in prison. This case has been analysed to death by psychologists and psychiatrists over the years, and there were general areas of agreement between most studies. As a starting point, it's the fact that both John Duffy and David Mulcahy are clearly psychopaths. They have no ability to feel remorse or guilt for their actions, and they have absolutely no empathy for their victims. Both men appear to have only been able to get sexually aroused by acts of violence against women, but David Mulcahy's personality was much more sadistic, and he required additional acts of degradation and emotional torture in order to gain and maintain an erection. Whilst Duffy appeared to be content with raping women, Mulcahy found he needed ever more increasing acts of barbarity to achieve gratification, and he was, in many regards, the more dangerous of the two, as he suggested escalating to murder in order to get the high he was looking for. But how did the pair get to this point? It's generally agreed that David Mulcahy was the leader and John Duffy was the willing follower. When they met as children, they were both lost, isolated, and bullied little boys, and each was looking for something the other could provide. John Duffy wanted someone to tell him what to do, and David Mulcahy wanted someone he could dominate and control, a little minion. I firmly believe there's a huge gap in our understanding of David Mulcahy. His almost visceral hatred of women stems from somewhere. I don't believe for a moment it was simply due to him being rejected by girls when he was a teenager. He hated women with a passion, wanted to hurt them, destroy them, and from a young age, he had fancies of raping them. Rape is a sexual act, but it's rooted in power and control. It's a way for a man to utterly destroy a woman, or another man, to completely dominate them and render them powerless. It's a way of inflicting emotional wounds so deep that they may never heal, and that person will always remember the person who did it to them. This is what David Mulcahy wanted to achieve. This is what got him off. Eventually, as I stated, this wasn't enough for him. He wanted to feel even more powerful, so he killed his victims, which made him feel like a god. I think that John Duffy also had some level of this trait, an underlying disdain for women, but this was nurtured by David Mulcahy. Women were the source of all of his issues. They were all bitches and slags, and by raping them, look how powerful he can be. Mulcahy essentially gave Duffy the key to being powerful when it was completely powerless and marginalised in society. The pair existed in their own little bubble, It was the two of them against the world, which, when the pair combined, turned from a dark, desolate place into a hunting ground. The hunt was just as exciting as the offences themselves. The planning, the anticipation, watching women who had no idea they were being targeted. I've no doubt they sat in their car sometimes, deciding which women to attack. Those they decided not to attack were lucky and were only allowed to go on their way because these two gods had decided this was their will. When they selected the victim, it was because these two powerful men had decided it was their time, and no doubt they fantasized about what they were going to do, imagining the women's screams, the terror in her eyes, knowing that they caused that. An important question in this case is, why did John Duffy confess, and why did this happen almost 11 years after his first arrest? I don't believe for a second this had anything to do with remorse or guilt for his actions, and I find the implication that he did this to stop Malachi from raping and murdering other women laughable. This would suggest that John Duffy is a man capable of feeling these emotions, which is completely contrary to his personality type. I've read several articles on this. I think one raises a really good point. He was bored. However, I would go further than that. I think John Duffy was bored, potentially resentful, but most importantly, he wanted the attention and to feel powerful again. I think John Duffy kept this ace up his sleeve to play when he wanted to. After almost 11 years behind bars, potentially he was bored. His case may have been slipping into obscurity. No one was paying him attention or acknowledging how powerful he was. Also supported that, soon after he was arrested, the link between John Duffy and David Malachi was severed. The latter never visited his friend or communicated with him in any way. Potentially Duffy was resentful of this. He was in prison for the rest of his life, whilst his partner in crime was outliving his life, having turned his back on him. Perhaps Duffy found out about the fact that Malachi had fathered 4 children, something he could never do, and this increased his resentment. However, I think the most important thing was a feeling of power. Duffy knew he was holding the key to everything. At any moment, he knew that his word would lead to hundreds of police officers working thousands of hours to corroborate his story. He would be interviewed at length, and he would eventually end up in court, all eyes on him, the serial rapist, serial killer. He ultimately had power over David Malachi. If he opened his mouth, then this man's life would be over. This had nothing to do with saving women from being raped and murdered. If this was even remotely true, he would have given up his ridiculous pantomime of having amnesia years before giving his confession. Perhaps he saw it as his swan song, one more day in the spotlight, a sad little man who had spent his whole life abusing others to make himself feel big. It's suspected that the pair committed more murders than the 3 we know about, and likely countless more rapes. Maybe John Duffy's still holding onto some cards that he will play one day when he becomes bored again and wants attention. The final question is whether John Duffy and David Malachi would have committed these offences on their own had they not met. This is a very difficult question to answer. In my personal opinion, with regards to John Duffy, no, but I'm on the fence. With David Malachi, absolutely. David Malachi was a sadistic psychopath who had a seething hatred of women from a young age. I think, alone, he would have eventually begun raping women, and, if he hadn't been caught, killing them. With regards to Duffy, I think that he had an underlying hatred of women, of feelings of inadequacy, and Malachi built on this. It gave him an outlet for these feelings. Without him, I think that Duffy would have been a domestic abuser who victimized his partners in order to control them, so they didn't leave him. But I'm not convinced that he would have escalated his behavior to the campaign of stranger rape and murders that characterized the pair's reign of terror. The local high school in Oakville stood as a pillar of the community, shaping the minds of the town's youth for generations. It was here, in the fall of 2022, that a chilling series of events would unfold, forever shattering the town's sense of security and innocence. At the center of this harrowing tale were 2 individuals. Miranda Jarvis, a vibrant 18-year-old senior, was the epitome of small-town charm. With her long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, Miranda was beloved by her peers and teachers alike. She excelled in her studies, particularly in English literature, and harbored dreams of becoming a writer. Enter Mark Reynolds, a 32-year-old substitute teacher who arrived in Oakville with a mysterious past.
and a quiet demeanor that initially endeared him to the faculty and students. As the crisp autumn air settled over Oakville, no one could have predicted the dark storm brewing on the horizon. The story that unfolded over the following months would test the limits of human obsession, challenge the town's faith in its institutions, and leave an indelible mark on all those involved. This is the true account of how a substitute teacher's unhealthy fixation on a student spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt Oakville for years to come. Miranda Jarvis was born and raised in Oakville, the only child of James and Lucy Jarvis. Her father owned the local hardware store, while her mother worked as a nurse at the town's small hospital. From a young age, Miranda displayed a precocious intelligence and a vivid imagination that set her apart from her peers. Throughout her childhood and teenage years, Miranda's passion for literature and writing blossomed. She devoured classic novels, penned short stories, and kept a detailed journal of her thoughts and experiences. Her teachers often praised her insightful essays and creative writing pieces, predicting a bright future for the young wordsmith. Miranda's life wasn't without its challenges. In her sophomore year, her parents went through a rough patch in their marriage, leading to a brief separation. The experience deeply affected Miranda, and she channeled her emotions into her writing. Mark Reynolds' path to Oakville High School was far from conventional. Born in a bustling city on the East Coast, Mark had always been drawn to the world of literature and academia. He excelled in his studies, particularly in English and philosophy. Despite his academic achievements, Mark struggled to find his footing in the professional world. He began his career as a high school English teacher in his hometown, where he quickly gained a reputation for his engaging teaching style and deep knowledge of literature. However, after 3 years, Mark abruptly resigned from his position under mysterious circumstances. Rumors circulated about an inappropriate relationship with a student, but nothing was ever proven, and no charges were filed. Following this setback, Mark drifted from job to job, never staying in one place for too long. He worked as a copywriter, a bookstore clerk, and even tried his hand at writing a novel. But success eluded him. As the years passed, a sense of bitterness and resentment began to take root in Mark's psyche. He felt that the world had denied him the recognition and success he deserved. The crisp morning air of September 15, 2022, held no hint of the pivotal moment about to unfold within the walls of Oakville School. As students filed into Mrs. Henderson's advanced English literature class, a buzz of curiosity filled the room. Their regular teacher was out on maternity leave, and today they would meet their long-term substitute. Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the classroom. He introduced himself with a quiet confidence. As he began to discuss the semester's curriculum, focusing on Gothic literature, many students found themselves drawn in by his evident passion for the subject. It was during this introduction that Mark's eyes first fell on Miranda Jarvis, seated in the second row, her hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Miranda listened with rapt attention. When Mark posed a question about the themes in Edgar Allan Poe's works, Miranda's hand shot up, and she offered an insightful analysis that caught the substitute teacher off guard. Mark, impressed by her eloquence, engaged Miranda in a brief discussion about Poe's use of symbolism. As they talked, he noticed the spark of intelligence in her green eyes, the way she articulated her thoughts with a maturity beyond her years. For a moment, Mark felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of intellectual discourse with a kindred spirit. As the class progressed, Mark found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Miranda. He called on her often, each time feeling a small surge of excitement at her thoughtful responses. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Miranda lingered behind, approaching Mark's desk with a copy of her favorite Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. They engaged in a brief but animated discussion about the story's Gothic elements and psychological undertones. As Miranda turned to leave, she smiled warmly at Mark, thanking him for the engaging class. Mark watched her go, a strange mix of emotions stirring within him: admiration, intrigue, and something darker that he couldn't quite name. That night, as Mark sat alone in his rented room, his thoughts kept drifting back to Miranda. He told himself it was merely the excitement of finding a promising student, someone who shared his passion for literature. But deep down, in a part of his psyche he dared not examine too closely, Mark knew that something had shifted. The seed of obsession had been planted, and it would soon grow into a twisted, all-consuming force that would change everything. In the weeks following that first encounter, Mark Reynolds' fixation on Miranda Jarvis grew at an alarming rate. Mark found himself looking forward to his advanced English literature class with an intensity that both thrilled and unsettled him. As September gave way to October, Mark's behavior began to change in subtle but significant ways. He started arriving at school earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of Miranda in the hallways. He lingered in the teacher's lounge, eavesdropping on conversations about students, his ears perking up at any mention of her name. Mark's nights were increasingly consumed by thoughts of Miranda. He pored over her essays, reading and rereading them long after he had finished grading. He began to imagine conversations with her, picturing scenarios where they could interact outside of class. In his mind, Miranda understood him in a way no one else ever had. One evening, while grading papers, Mark came across a personal essay Miranda had written about her aspirations to become a writer. The raw honesty and vulnerability in her words struck a chord deep within him. That night, he crossed a line he had never dared to before. He searched for Miranda on social media. Mark spent hours scrolling through Miranda's public posts, absorbing every detail of her life outside of school. He learned about her favorite books, her hobbies, the cafes she frequented with her friends. Each new piece of information fed his growing obsession, making him feel closer to her. As his fixation intensified, Mark's teaching began to suffer. He would lose his train of thought mid-lecture, distracted by Miranda's presence. Other students noticed his frequent glances in her direction, the way his voice would soften when addressing her. Whispers and giggles sometimes rippled through the classroom, but Mark was oblivious to everything except Miranda. Outside of school, Mark's life began to revolve around his obsession. He started frequenting the local library where Miranda volunteered, pretending to browse books while watching her from afar. He would drive past her house on his way home, his heart racing at the thought of catching a glimpse of her through a window. Mark knew on some level that his behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. There were moments of clarity when he would be struck by the magnitude of his obsession, and he would resolve to put it behind him. But these moments were fleeting, quickly overwhelmed by the intoxicating pull of his fixation on Miranda. As October drew to a close, Mark's obsession reached a fever pitch. He began to fantasize about a future with Miranda, convincing himself that she must feel the same connection he did. The line between reality and his twisted imagination blurred, setting the stage for the disturbing events that were about to unfold. The first truly alarming incident occurred on a chilly November afternoon. Miranda had stayed after class to discuss a paper with Mark, unaware of the tempest brewing within her teacher. As she gathered her things to leave, Mark impulsively reached out and touched her hand, ostensibly to take the paper she was handing him. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a jolt through Mark's system. Miranda, startled by the unexpected touch, quickly withdrew her hand. She noticed a strange intensity in Mark's eyes that made her uncomfortable. Mumbling a hasty goodbye, she hurried out of the classroom, leaving Mark standing there, his hand still tingling from the brief contact. That evening, Miranda confided in her best friend Lily about the odd interaction. While Lily brushed it off as nothing serious, Miranda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left her with. She resolved to be more cautious around Mr. Reynolds, but didn't want to make a big deal out of what could have been an innocent mistake. Mark, on the other hand, spent the night reliving that moment of contact. In his mind, it became a significant event, a sign that his feelings for Miranda were reciprocated. 2 weeks after the hand-touching incident, Mark's behavior took an even more concerning turn. During lunch period, he overheard Miranda telling a friend about a poetry reading at a local bookstore that evening. Unable to resist the temptation, Mark decided to attend. That night, he sat in the back of the dimly lit bookstore, watching as Miranda and her friends arrived. Throughout the reading, Mark's eyes never left Miranda. He observed every laugh, every thoughtful nod, every whispered comment to her friends. In his mind, he was sharing the experience with her, part of her world. As the event ended and people began to leave, Miranda spotted Mark. Surprise and a flicker of unease crossed her face. She approached him hesitantly, asking if he had enjoyed the reading. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled through a response, his usual eloquence deserting him. Miranda quickly excused herself, visibly uncomfortable. As she left with her friends, Mark overheard her whispering, "He's everywhere lately. It's kind of creepy." The words hit Mark like a physical blow, but instead of serving as a wake-up call, they only intensified his obsession. The situation reached a critical point in early December. Miranda had been avoiding staying after class, and tried to minimize her interactions with Mark. Frustrated and increasingly desperate, Mark made a decision that would irreversibly cross the line. Using the emergency contact information from the school records, Mark obtained Miranda's home address. One evening, he drove to her house, parking down the street. He sat there for hours, watching the Jarvis residence, imagining Miranda inside going about her evening routine. As luck would have it, Miranda stepped out to take out the trash. When she spotted Mark's car, recognition dawned on her face, quickly followed by fear. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Panicked, Mark drove away, his mind racing. He knew he had gone too far, but he couldn't stop himself. The next day at school, Miranda was absent. When she returned the following day, she looked pale and avoided eye contact with Mark. Unbeknownst to Mark, Miranda had reported the incident to her parents and the school principal. An investigation was quietly launched, but before any action could be taken, the situation would take a dramatic and tragic turn. The morning of December 15, 2022, dawned cold and gray in Oakville. As families across town began their daily routines, Lucy Jarvis knocked on her daughter's bedroom door, calling out that breakfast was ready. When she received no response, Lucy opened the door expecting to find Miranda still asleep. Instead, she was met with an empty, undisturbed bed. Panic quickly set in as Lucy and James Jarvis searched their home, calling Miranda's name. Her car was still in the driveway, her phone left on her nightstand. There was no sign of forced entry, no note left behind. It was as if Miranda had simply vanished into thin air. The Jarvis immediately called the police, and within hours, the quiet town of Oakville was transformed into a hive of activity. Police cars patrolled the streets, and search parties were organized to comb through nearby woods and parks. As the search for Miranda Jarvis entered its second week, the Oakville Police Department's investigation shifted into high gear. Detective Lucy Reeves, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took the lead. Her first order of business was to re-interview everyone in Miranda's life, starting with her closest friends and family. Lily Thompson recounted to Detective Reeves the growing unease Miranda had expressed about Mr. Reynolds' behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She mentioned the incident at the poetry reading and Miranda's discomfort with Mr. Reynolds' increasing presence in her life. On December 23rd, Detective Reeves brought Mark Reynolds in for formal questioning. In the stark interrogation room of the police station, Mark sat across from Reeves, his usual composure noticeably shaken. Detective Reeves began the interview casually, asking about Mark's background and his time at Oakville School. As the questions turned to his relationship with Miranda, Mark's responses became increasingly evasive. He denied any inappropriate behavior, insisting that his interest in Miranda was purely academic. But when confronted with evidence of his presence outside Miranda's house the night before her disappearance, Mark's facade began to crack. He stammered through an explanation about wanting to drop off some books for Miranda to read over the winter break. But his story was full of inconsistencies. As the interrogation wore on, Detective Reeves noticed Mark's right hand constantly fidgeting with something in his pocket. When asked to empty his pockets, Mark hesitated before reluctantly pulling out a delicate silver charm bracelet. With a sinking feeling, Reeves recognized it as the bracelet Miranda was wearing in the most recent photos her parents had provided. Mark's possession of Miranda's personal item was damning. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of involvement in Miranda's disappearance. As he was led away in handcuffs, Mark maintained his innocence, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and something darker that sent chills down Detective Reeves' spine. The news of Mark Reynolds' arrest sent shockwaves through Oakville. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, intellectual substitute teacher with the disturbing allegations against him. Parents demanded answers from the school board about how such a person had been allowed to teach their children. As the investigation continued, police executed a search warrant on Mark's rented room. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives discovered a journal filled with rambling entries about Miranda. The evidence painted a chilling picture of Mark's deteriorating mental state and his unhealthy fixation on Miranda. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Where was Miranda Jarvis? Despite Mark's arrest and the damning evidence against him, there was still no trace of the missing girl. One entry, dated December 14th, caught Detective Reeves' attention. In it, Mark wrote about a special place where he and Miranda could be together forever, away from the judgmental eyes of the world. The entry was vague, but it mentioned an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. Acting on this lead, police conducted a thorough search of abandoned buildings in the area. On December 27th, their efforts paid off when they discovered an old dilapidated cabin deep in the woods outside Oakville. As officers approached the cabin, they noticed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud and a faint smell of smoke from the chimney. With hearts racing, the police team breached the cabin. Inside, they found evidence of someone living there recently. Food wrappers, a makeshift bed, and most disturbingly, several of Miranda's personal items scattered around the room. But there was no sign of Miranda herself. Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds remained in custody, stubbornly maintaining his innocence despite the mounting evidence against him. During interrogations, he alternated between proclaiming his love for Miranda and insisting that he was being framed. His erratic behavior led the district attorney to order a psychological evaluation. Volunteers joined the police in searching the woods, hoping to find any trace of Miranda. In a surprising turn of events, on December 30th, Lily Thompson came forward with new information. Trembling and visibly distressed, she revealed to Detective Reeves that she had been withholding crucial details out of fear and misplaced loyalty. Philly recounted a conversation she had with Miranda just days before her disappearance. Miranda had confided in her about a secret online relationship she had been having with someone she met in a writing forum. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. While Mark Reynolds remained a person of interest, the police now had to consider the possibility that Miranda's disappearance was connected to this mysterious online figure. The IP address used by the user in the writing forum was traced back to a computer in the Oakville School Library. Cross-referencing the times of the online interactions with the school's records, Reeves found that they coincided perfectly with Mark Reynolds' free periods. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Mark hadn't just been obsessing over Miranda from afar. He had been actively manipulating her, creating a false persona to gain her trust and lure her into a meeting. Armed with this new information, Reeves confronted Mark in another intense interrogation. Initially, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as Reeves laid out the evidence piece by piece, Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a chilling moment, Mark's demeanor suddenly shifted. Gone was the nervous, protesting teacher, replaced by a cold, calculating individual. With an unsettling calmness, he began to reveal the full extent of his deception. Mark admitted to creating the online persona months earlier. Long before he came to Oakville, he had been grooming Miranda online, gaining her trust and fueling her dreams of becoming a writer. It was just after dawn when a search dog picked up a scent. Following the dog's lead, rescuers pushed deeper into the forest, hope and dread warring in their hearts. As they crested a small hill, they spotted a flash of color against the dull winter landscape: Miranda's bright blue jacket. Miranda Jarvis was found huddled in the hollow of an old oak tree, cold, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive. As Miranda recovered in the hospital, surrounded by her overjoyed parents and a protective police presence, the full story of her ordeal came to light. She recounted how she had agreed to meet mysterious online user at the cabin, believing it to be a surprise arranged by a supportive mentor. The shock and terror she felt upon discovering Mark's true identity drove her to flee into the woods, where she had been wandering and hiding for over 2 weeks, surviving on stream water and whatever edible plants she could recognize. The aftermath of Miranda's rescue and Mark's arrest was far-reaching. The school faced intense scrutiny over its hiring practices and student protection policies. Several administrators resigned in the wake of the scandal, and the school board implemented stringent new background check procedures for all staff. Mark was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, stalking, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, without the possibility of parole. For Miranda and her family, the road to recovery was long and challenging. Miranda underwent extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of her experience. She found solace in writing, using her journal to process her emotions, and eventually turning her story into a powerful memoir that would go on to help other survivors of stalking and abuse. As for Oakville, the town would never be quite the same. The innocence of small-town life had been shattered, replaced by a wary vigilance. Yet in the face of this tragedy, the community had come together, demonstrating the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. The case of Miranda Jarvis and Mark Reynolds serves as a chilling reminder of the dark undercurrents that can exist beneath the surface of even the most seemingly idyllic communities. It highlights the vulnerability of young people in an increasingly connected world and the insidious ways in which predators can manipulate and exploit their victims. In the picturesque coastal town of Millhaven, where the salty breeze carries whispers of secrets and lies, a tragedy was brewing beneath the surface of everyday life. The quaint streets, lined with colorful boutiques and cozy cafes, masked a web of deceit that would soon unravel, leaving the community shaken to its core. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Lachlan Thorne, a man desperate for financial stability and respect. Zara Callahan, a talented chef with dreams bigger than the small town could contain. And Enzo Rossi, the charismatic owner of a popular Italian restaurant. To the outside world, Lachlan and Zara appeared to be the perfect couple, young and in love with a bright future ahead. Their engagement was the talk of the town, a beacon of hope in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming in their relationship, cracks that would soon split wide open. Enzo, with his easy charm and successful business, seemed to have it all. His restaurant was a local institution, and his marriage to Vivian, a respected member of the town council, was envied by many. Yet, behind closed doors, Enzo harbored his own dissatisfactions and desires. As summer faded into autumn, the stage was set for a series of events that would lead to betrayal, blackmail, and ultimately, bloodshed. The story of how these three lives collided is a cautionary tale of passion, greed, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in a town where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Lachlan Thorne's story began far from the shores of Millhaven, in a struggling mining town where dreams went to die. The youngest of 4 children, Lachlan grew up watching his father descend into the depths of the earth day after day, only to return home beaten down by the relentless toil. His mother, a part-time seamstress, struggled to keep the family afloat, her fingers constantly pricked by needles as she worked late into the night. From an early age, Lachlan vowed he would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his parents. He threw himself into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. But the transition from his humble beginnings to the world of academia proved more challenging than he anticipated. Surrounded by wealthy peers who seemed to navigate college life with ease, Lachlan felt like an outsider, constantly battling the feeling that he didn't belong. Despite his best efforts, Lachlan's insecurities began to manifest in self-destructive behaviors. He developed a gambling habit, convinced that one big win could solve all his problems. Instead, it left him deeper in debt, forcing him to take on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By the time he graduated, the promise of a bright future had dimmed considerably. Lachlan drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing in the corporate world. His resume became a patchwork of short-term positions and gaps, each failure chipping away at his self-esteem. As his 30th birthday approached, he found himself back in a small town, not unlike the one he had tried so hard to escape. It was in Millhaven that Lachlan's luck seemed to change. He landed a job as a marketing manager for a local brewery, a position that finally allowed him to showcase his skills. More importantly, it was here that he met Zara Callahan. Their whirlwind romance offered Lachlan a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of. Successful, respected, and loved. When he proposed to Zara after just 6 months of dating, Lachlan truly believed he had finally overcome his past. But old habits die hard, and the pressure to provide Zara with the life he thought she deserved began to weigh heavily on him. As wedding plans progressed, Lachlan found himself once again drawn to the false promise of easy money, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Zara Callahan's journey to Millhaven was paved with both passion and pain. Born to a free-spirited mother and an absent father, Zara spent her childhood bouncing between relatives' homes and short-term apartments. Her mother, Fiona, was a talented artist, but struggled with substance abuse, leaving young Zara to fend for herself more often than not. It was during one of their stays with Zara's maternal grandmother that she discovered her love for cooking. In her grandmother's warm, fragrant kitchen, Zara found solace and stability. She would spend hours watching the elderly woman transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering dishes, soaking up every technique and family recipe like a sponge. As Zara entered her teenage years, her mother's addiction worsened. At 15, Zara made the difficult decision to leave her mother's care, moving in permanently with her grandmother. It was a choice that haunted her, but one that allowed her to focus on her dreams. She threw herself into her culinary pursuits, working part-time at local restaurants while excelling in her high school's home economics classes. Zara's talent didn't go unnoticed. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious culinary school, where she honed her skills and developed her own unique style. Her instructors praised her innovative approach to traditional dishes, and her fellow students admired her dedication and creativity. However, just as Zara was about to graduate, tragedy struck. Her grandmother passed away suddenly, leaving Zara feeling unmoored once again. Grief-stricken and unsure of her next move, she deferred her dreams of working in a big city restaurant and returned to her grandmother's house in Millhaven. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to settle her grandmother's affairs. But when she heard that the renowned restaurant was hiring, Zara saw an opportunity to gain experience while figuring out her next steps. She impressed Enzo Rossi with her skills and passion, and what was supposed to be a short-term position turned into years. Zara threw herself into her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become the restaurant's sous chef. She found a sense of family among her co-workers and began to put down roots in Millhaven. When she met Lachlan, it seemed like the final piece of her life was falling into place. Little did she know that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be shattered by a web of desire, deceit, and desperation. The restaurant stood as a testament to Enzo Rossi's unwavering ambition and culinary expertise. The restaurant, with its warm terracotta walls and the intoxicating aroma of authentic Italian cuisine, had been Enzo's dream since he first set foot in Millhaven 20 years ago. A first-generation immigrant, Enzo had arrived with little more than a suitcase full of his nonna's recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. The early years were a struggle, with Enzo working grueling hours to establish his restaurant's reputation. His charm and culinary skills gradually won over the initially skeptical locals, and the restaurant became the go-to spot for everything from first dates to golden wedding anniversaries. Enzo took pride in knowing his regular customers by name, always ready with a warm smile and a perfectly paired wine recommendation. It was during this period of growing success that Enzo met Vivian, a local girl from a well-respected family. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Millhaven for months. Vivian, with her sharp business acumen, helped streamline the restaurant's operations, allowing Enzo to focus on what he loved most, creating exquisite dishes in the kitchen. On the surface, Enzo appeared to have it all: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, and the respect of the community. He became a pillar of Millhaven society, sponsoring local events and mentoring aspiring chefs at the high school. His annual charity dinners were legendary, raising substantial funds for various community projects. However, as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Enzo's seemingly perfect life. The long hours at the restaurant took their toll on his marriage. Vivian, now deeply involved in local politics, had less and less time for the romantic gestures that had once characterized their relationship. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became focused on business strategies and social obligations. Enzo found himself increasingly restless, yearning for the passion that seemed to have faded from his life. He threw himself into his work, constantly innovating and expanding the restaurant's menu. But even his beloved kitchen began to feel like a gilded cage, trapping him in a life that no longer brought him joy. As he approached his 50th birthday, Enzo felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. He began to question the choices that had led him to this point, wondering if he had sacrificed too much of himself in pursuit of success. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that Enzo first began to see Zara as more than just his talented sous chef, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The spark between Enzo and Zara ignited on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in late autumn. The restaurant was uncharacteristically quiet, with only a handful of patrons braving the stormy weather. As closing time approached, Enzo found himself alone in the kitchen with Zara, both of them working in comfortable silence to prepare for the next day. It was Zara who broke the quiet, suggesting a new twist on one of the restaurant's classic dishes. Enzo, intrigued, invited her to demonstrate. as they worked side by side, chopping herbs and sautéing vegetables, Enzo was struck by Zara's passion and creativity. Her eyes lit up as she explained her ideas, and Enzo found himself drawn in not just by her culinary skills, but by her vibrant energy. As they tasted the finished dish together, their eyes met over the steaming plate. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enzo, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings, made a casual comment about the late hour and suggested they call it a night. But as Zara gathered her things to leave, a clap of thunder startled her, causing her to drop her bag. Enzo rushed to help, and as they both reached for the scattered contents, their hands touched. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through both of them. Before either could fully process what was happening, they found themselves in each other's arms, sharing a passionate kiss that left them both breathless and confused. In the days that followed, Enzo and Zara tried to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Stolen glances across the kitchen, lingering touches as they passed each other in the narrow hallways. It was only a matter of time before they gave in to their desires. Their first real encounter happened after hours in Enzo's office. What started as a discussion about the next season's menu quickly evolved into a heated expression of their pent-up passion. As they lay tangled together on the small leather sofa, both Enzo and Zara knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Zara, the affair was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Enzo was constantly at war with her guilt over betraying Lachlan. She told herself it was just a physical thing, that her feelings for her fiancé remained unchanged. But as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Enzo, not just physically but emotionally as well. Enzo, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the relationship. With Zara, he rediscovered the passion he had been missing both in and out of the kitchen. He convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that the years of dedication to his wife and his business entitled him to this secret indulgence. As summer turned to fall, their affair deepened, becoming more than just stolen moments of physical intimacy. Neither Enzo nor Zara were prepared for the storm that was brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Lachlan Thorne prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed through years of navigating the corporate world. So when Zara's behavior began to change subtly, he noticed. It started with small things. She was working later hours, seemed distracted during their time together, and was constantly checking her phone. At first, Lachlan attributed it to the stress of wedding planning and her increased responsibilities at the restaurant. But as the weeks passed, a nagging suspicion began to take root in his mind. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, ostensibly watching a movie together, Lachlan observed Zara smiling at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a message. When he casually asked who she was texting, Zara's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "A coworker?" she said, discussing a new recipe. But the flush on her cheeks and the way she quickly locked her phone told a different story. Determined to uncover the truth, Lachlan began to pay closer attention to Zara's schedule and movements. He noted the nights she came home particularly late, the weekends she claimed to be doing inventory at the restaurant. He even drove by the restaurant a few times, noting with growing unease that Zara's car was often the only one in the parking lot, besides Enzo's distinctive vintage Alfa Romeo. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a crisp autumn evening. Lachlan, unable to shake his suspicions, decided to surprise Zara at work. As he approached the restaurant, he saw two figures silhouetted in the dim light of the kitchen. Through the window, he watched in stunned silence as Enzo pulled Zara close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The sight hit Lachlan like a physical blow. He stumbled back to his car, his mind reeling. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted behavior, it all made sense now. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was having an affair with her boss. As he sat in his car watching the restaurant, a toxic mixture of emotions coursed through him. Hurt, betrayal, anger, but also surprisingly a cold calculation. Lachlan had always prided himself on his ability to turn situations to his advantage, and as the initial shock wore off, his mind began to work. He thought about the upcoming wedding, the deposits they had already paid. He thought about the shame of calling it off, of admitting to friends and family that he had been deceived. And then he thought about the restaurant, about Enzo's wealth and success. A plan began to form in Lachlan's mind. If Zara thought she could betray him and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. He would make her pay quite literally, and in doing so, he would secure the financial stability he had always craved. As he started his car and drove away from the restaurant, Lachlan's hurt and betrayal hardened into resolve. Zara's infidelity would be her downfall, and his ticket to the life he deserved. Lachlan bided his time, carefully planning his next move. He needed irrefutable evidence before confronting Zara. Over the next week, he meticulously documented her comings and goings, even going so far as to plant a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It was an invasion of privacy that made him feel dirty, but he justified it as necessary, given the circumstances. When he finally had what he needed, a recording of Zara and Enzo in an intimate conversation that left no doubt about their relationship, Lachlan set his plan in motion. He chose a quiet Sunday morning, when Zara was relaxed and off guard, to spring his trap. "Lachlan, I know about you and Enzo," he said without preamble as Zara sipped her coffee. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her face, drained of color, told him everything he needed to know. What followed was a conversation filled with tears, recriminations, and desperate pleas. Zara begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that Lachlan was the one she truly loved. But Lachlan had steeled himself against her explanations. He laid out his terms coldly. If she wanted to keep their engagement intact and avoid the scandal of her affair being exposed, she would have to do exactly as he said. His demands were simple yet devastating. Zara would use her position at the restaurant to embezzle money, skimming from the daily takings and manipulating the books to cover her tracks. The amount would start small but increase over time. Lachlan framed it as restitution, compensation for the hurt and humiliation she had caused him. Zara, caught between her guilt and her fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. She rationalized that it would be temporary, that she could find a way out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But deep down, she knew she had set foot on a dangerous path. The scheme began slowly. Zara, leveraging her trusted position and her access to the restaurant's financial systems, started by pocketing small amounts from the cash register, no more than $50 at a time. She meticulously altered the daily reports, adjusting inventory numbers and falsifying receipts to cover her tracks. Each time she handed the stolen money to Lachlan, she felt a piece of her soul crumble away. Lachlan, for his part, treated the whole affair with a chilling detachment. He set up a separate bank account to deposit the stolen funds, careful to keep the transactions below amounts that might trigger suspicion. To the outside world, he played the role of the doting fiancé, but in private, he was cold and demanding, constantly pressing Zara for more. As weeks turned into months, the amounts grew larger. Lachlan's appetite for money seemed insatiable, and Zara found herself taking greater risks to meet his demands. She began to manipulate the payroll, creating ghost employees and diverting their salaries. She falsified supplier invoices, pocketing the difference between the actual and inflated costs. The stress of maintaining the deception took its toll on Zara. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights spent agonizing over her actions. Her once bubbly personality became subdued, her passion for cooking diminishing, as the kitchen she once loved became a constant reminder of her betrayal. Lachlan, however, thrived. The influx of cash allowed him to pay off his gambling debts and even start making risky investments in the stock market. He began to dress better, drive a newer car, and talk about purchasing a house, all under the guise of planning for their future together. As the wedding date approached, Zara found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The thought of marrying Lachlan filled her with dread, but she saw no way out. She had committed crimes, betrayed not only her fiancé but also Enzo and the restaurant that had given her a chance. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making each day a struggle to maintain the facade of normality. Little did Zara know that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Enzo, sharp-eyed and attentive to his business, had begun to notice discrepancies in the books. The confrontation that was brewing would set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Enzo Rossi had built his restaurant empire on attention to detail, and it was this meticulous nature that first alerted him to the problem. Small inconsistencies in the daily reports, slight discrepancies in the inventory. Individually, they were easy to overlook, but collectively, they painted a troubling picture. At first, Enzo attributed the errors to simple mistakes or software glitches. He spent long nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the numbers, but as the discrepancies continued to mount, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was stealing from him, and given the nature of the manipulations, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations. His suspicions inevitably turned to Zara. She had access to all the systems, and the changes had begun around the time their affair started. The thought that she might be betraying him professionally as well as personally was almost too much to bear. Enzo chose a quiet afternoon to confront Zara, calling her into his office under the pretense of discussing a new menu. As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade dropped. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Zara's world seemed to crumble around her. Caught between her loyalty to Enzo and her fear of Lachlan, she broke down, confessing everything through a flood of tears. She told Enzo about Lachlan's discovery of their affair, the blackmail, and the escalating demands for money. Enzo listened in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions raging within him. Anger at the betrayal warred with concern for Zara, and fear for his own reputation. The revelation of the theft was bad enough, but if word of their affair got out, it would destroy not only his marriage, but also the carefully cultivated image he had built in the community. In the end, self-preservation won out. Enzo made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He wouldn't go to the police. The risk of exposure was too great. Instead, he would handle this internally. He demanded that Zara end things with Lachlan immediately and return every cent that had been stolen. In return, he would keep quiet about her crimes. What Enzo didn't realize was that his decision to keep the police out of it would set in motion a dangerous chain of events. Lachlan, already teetering on the edge of desperation, would not take kindly to having his source of money cut off. And Zara, caught between two men and her own guilt, was a ticking time bomb of emotions. As Zara left Enzo's office, both of them believed they had found a solution. In reality, they had merely set the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Enzo, Zara felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, constantly on the verge of losing her balance. She knew she had to end things with Lachlan, but the thought filled her with dread. Lachlan had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, and she feared his reaction to being cut off. Lachlan, oblivious to the shift in dynamics, continued to press Zara for more money. His demands had become increasingly erratic, fueled by early success in his stock market gambles. He talked of quitting his job, of investing full-time, painting pictures of a lavish future that made Zara's stomach churn with anxiety. When Zara finally gathered the courage to confront Lachlan, the conversation quickly spiraled out of control. She told him about Enzo's discovery, her voice shaking as she explained that there would be no more money. Lachlan's reaction was explosive. He raged at her, accusing her of choosing Enzo over him, threatening to expose their affair and her theft to the entire town. In a moment of desperation, Zara blurted out that Enzo already knew about the affair, that he had chosen to keep it quiet to protect his own reputation. It was the wrong thing to say. Lachlan's anger transformed into a cold, calculating fury. If Enzo was willing to cover up the theft to hide the affair, Lachlan reasoned, then perhaps there was still a way to profit from the situation. Over the next few days, Lachlan began to formulate a new plan. He started showing up at the restaurant during busy hours, making vague comments within earshot of staff and customers. He sent anonymous letters to Vivian, hinting at her husband's infidelity without providing concrete details. Each move was designed to ratchet up the pressure on Enzo, to push him towards a breaking point. Zara watched this unfolding disaster with a sense of helpless dread. She tried to warn Enzo, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming paranoid and short-tempered. The once bustling kitchen of the restaurant became a pressure cooker of tension, with staff picking up on the strained atmosphere between Enzo and Zara. As Lachlan's actions became bolder, Enzo's grip on the situation began to slip. He started drinking heavily, making careless mistakes in the kitchen. Vivian, picking up on the whispers and her husband's strange behavior, became increasingly suspicious and confrontational. The carefully constructed lives of all involved were unraveling at an alarming rate. It was clear that something had to give, but no one could have predicted the violent culmination that was about to unfold in the very place where it all began, the kitchen of the restaurant. Tonight that changed everything started like any other at the restaurant. The dining room hummed with the chatter of patrons, the clink of cutlery against fine china, and the soft strains of Italian music. But in the kitchen, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Enzo had been drinking since the afternoon, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he barked orders at his staff. Zara worked silently at her station, her eyes constantly darting to the door, dreading Lachlan's now nightly appearance to taunt them. It was just past 9 when Lachlan pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with a dangerous combination of alcohol and bravado. "Enzo, you and I need to have a chat," he announced loudly, causing several of the kitchen staff to pause in their work. Enzo, his patience already worn thin, gestured sharply for Lachlan to follow him into the small office adjacent to the kitchen. Zara, her heart pounding, trailed after them, determined to prevent the confrontation she had been fearing. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting and accusations. Lachlan, emboldened by drink, laid out his demands, a substantial sum of money in exchange for his silence. Enzo, equally inebriated, refused, his face purpling with rage as he yelled at Lachlan to get out of his restaurant. Zara tried to intervene, pleading with both men to calm down, to think rationally. But her words fell on deaf ears. The situation escalated rapidly, with Lachlan grabbing a knife from a nearby prep table, and Enzo lunging for the gun he kept hidden in his desk drawer for emergencies. What happened next would be debated in the courts for months to come. In the chaos of the moment, with Zara screaming for them to stop, a shot rang out. The bullet, whether by intent or accident, struck Lachlan in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face before crumpling to the floor. The kitchen erupted into pandemonium. Staff members rushed in, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone called for an ambulance, while others tried to stem the flow of blood from Lachlan's wound. Enzo stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, as the full impact of what had just occurred washed over him. Zara, in a state of shock, found herself mechanically reciting the events to the police officers who arrived on the scene. She watched as Lachlan was stretchered out, his fate uncertain, and as Enzo was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it had been self-defense. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the weight of her role in the tragedy began to sink in. Her affair with Enzo, her agreement to Lachlan's blackmail scheme, her failure to come clean earlier, all of it had led to this moment. The life she had carefully built in Millhaven lay in ruins around her, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shot fired in the kitchen of the restaurant that night echoed far beyond its walls, setting in motion a series of events that would captivate and horrify the small coastal town for years to come. In the days following the shooting, Millhaven found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager for any morsel of information about the tragedy that had unfolded in the town's beloved Italian restaurant. The investigation moved quickly, with detectives piecing together the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to that fateful night. Zara, racked with guilt and exhaustion, provided a full confession, detailing the affair, the blackmail, and the theft. Her cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the full extent of the situation. Lachlan, having survived the initial shooting, clung to life in the intensive care unit of Millhaven General Hospital. As he recovered, he too began to talk, his version of events largely corroborating Zara's account, though colored by his own perspective of victimhood. Enzo, initially held on attempted murder charges, maintained his claim of self-defense. The discovery of the knife near where Lachlan had fallen lent some credence to his story, but the circumstances surrounding the confrontation complicated matters. As the details of the case became public, the town reeled from the revelations. The image of the restaurant as a charming family restaurant was shattered, replaced by lurid tales of adultery and financial crimes. Vivian, devastated by her husband's infidelity and the public humiliation, filed for divorce and resigned from her position on the town council. The employees of the restaurant found themselves suddenly out of work, as the restaurant was closed indefinitely, its future uncertain. Many in the town felt betrayed, their trust in people they had considered pillars of the community irreparably damaged. As the case moved towards trial, plea negotiations began behind the scenes. Prosecutors, aware of the complexities of the case and the potential for a lengthy, sensational trial, were open to deals that would avoid a public spectacle. Zara, advised by her lawyer and hoping to avoid a harsh sentence, agreed to testify against both Lachlan and Enzo in exchange for leniency. Lachlan, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, sought a similar arrangement eager to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an instigator. Enzo, however, remained adamant about his innocence, insisting on his right to a trial. His defense team began to construct a narrative of a hard-working businessman driven to desperate measures by threats and blackmail. As the legal machinery ground forward, the residents of Millhaven were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. Trust had been broken, reputations shattered, and the very fabric of the community tested. The true cost of the events at the restaurant, it seemed, would be paid not just by those directly involved, but by the entire town. The jury, while sympathetic to the pressures he had faced, couldn't overlook the fact that he had escalated the confrontation by producing a gun. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Zara Callahan, in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation, received a suspended sentence and probation for her role in the embezzlement scheme. The judge, taking into account her remorse and the coercion she had faced, opted for leniency. However, her career in the culinary world was effectively over, her reputation irreparably tarnished. Lachlan Thorne, who survived the shooting but was left with permanent injuries, pleaded guilty to extortion and blackmail charges. He received a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his actions and the devastating consequences they had wrought. The restaurant never reopened its doors. The building stood empty for years, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The year was 2018, and what began as a seemingly ordinary romance between 2 young adults would spiral into a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. Michelle Marsters, a 26-year-old aspiring writer with a troubled past, and Jake Brendan, a 28-year-old software engineer from a close-knit family, were an unlikely pair. Their whirlwind romance captivated their friends and family at first, but as time went on, those closest to them began to sense that something was amiss. Michelle Marsters' childhood was a tapestry of instability and emotional turmoil. Born to a single mother who struggled with substance abuse, Michelle spent her formative years bouncing between relatives' homes and foster care. The constant upheaval left deep scars on her psyche, manifesting in an intense fear of abandonment and a desperate need for control in her relationships. As a teenager, Michelle found solace in writing, pouring her pain and longing onto the pages of countless journals. Her talent for crafting vivid narratives earned her a scholarship to a local community college, where she excelled in creative writing courses. However, her personal life remained tumultuous, marked by a series of volatile relationships that always seemed to end in heartbreak and betrayal. Jake Brendan, on the other hand, grew up in a warm and loving household. The middle child of 3, Jake was raised by parents who prioritized family bonds and open communication. Family dinners were a nightly occurrence in the Brendan home, and weekends were often spent on camping trips or gathered around board games. This nurturing environment fostered Jake's natural inclination towards kindness and his strong sense of loyalty to those he loved. Academically gifted, Jake breezed through school and earned a full ride to a prestigious university where he studied computer science. His easygoing nature and quick wit made him popular among his peers, and he maintained a close circle of friends from high school through his college years. Michelle and Jake's paths crossed at a local coffee shop. Michelle, hunched over her laptop, was startled when Jake accidentally bumped into her table, nearly spilling her latte. Flustered, Jake insisted on buying her a new drink, and what started as an awkward encounter quickly blossomed into an engaging conversation about literature, technology, and their shared love of obscure indie films. Drawn to Jake's warmth and stability, Michelle found herself opening up in a way she never had before. Jake, in turn, was captivated by Michelle's passion for storytelling and her apparent vulnerability. They exchanged numbers that night, and within weeks they were practically inseparable. The early days of their relationship were a whirlwind of romantic gestures and shared adventures. Michelle introduced Jake to the world of local poetry slams and art galleries, while Jake taught Michelle the basics of coding and took her on hikes to his favorite scenic spots. To their friends, they seemed like the perfect couple, Jake's calm demeanor perfectly complementing Michelle's creative energy. However, as the honeymoon phase began to wane, subtle cracks started to appear in their idyllic romance. Michelle's need for constant reassurance, and her discomfort with Jake's close relationships with his family and friends began to surface. What Jake initially perceived as endearing clinginess slowly morphed into something more sinister. As Michelle and Jake's relationship progressed past the 6-month mark, the initial euphoria of new love began to give way to a more complex and troubling dynamic. Michelle's past traumas and abandonment issues, long simmering beneath the surface, started to manifest in increasingly problematic ways. It started subtly at first. Michelle would text Jake incessantly throughout the day, growing anxious and irritable if he didn't respond promptly. She began to question his whereabouts when they weren't together, often asking for photographic evidence of his location. Jake, attributing this behavior to Michelle's deep affection for him, initially found it endearing and did his best to accommodate her needs. However, Michelle's demands for Jake's time and attention soon began to escalate. She would grow visibly upset when Jake made plans with his friends or family, often guilt-tripping him into canceling to spend time with her instead. Jake's best friend since childhood, Michael, was the first to voice his concerns. During a rare guys' night out, Michael confronted Jake about his increasing absence from their social circle. "Jake, you've barely hung out with us in months. What's going on, man? Is everything okay with you and Michelle?" Jake brushed off Michael's worries, insisting that he was just busy and that everything was fine. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right in his relationship with Michelle. As weeks turned into months, Michelle's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling. She began to monitor Jake's social media accounts, questioning him about every female interaction, no matter how innocuous. She insisted on knowing his phone password and would often scroll through his messages while he slept. Jake's family, once warmly welcoming of Michelle, started to grow wary of her influence on their son and brother. Sarah Brendan, Jake's mother, was particularly concerned. She noticed how Jake had become withdrawn and less communicative, a stark contrast to the open and affectionate son she had raised. During a family dinner that Michelle reluctantly attended, tensions came to a head. When Sarah innocently asked Jake about his plans to attend his cousin's upcoming wedding, Michelle interjected before he could respond. "We're actually thinking of taking a trip that weekend, aren't we, Jake?" she said, her voice sickly sweet but her eyes flashing with warning. Jake, caught off guard, stumbled through a non-committal response, much to his family's visible dismay. After dinner, Sarah pulled her son aside, her voice low and urgent. "Jake, honey, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you missing family events, barely calling. Is everything all right with Michelle?" Michelle, overhearing the exchange, flew into a rage on the drive home. She accused Jake of allowing his family to come between them, twisting the situation to paint herself as the victim. "Your mother hates me, Jake. She's trying to poison you against me. Can't you see that?" Torn between his love for Michelle and his deep-rooted family ties, Jake found himself walking an increasingly precarious tightrope. He began to make excuses to his family and friends, gradually withdrawing from social engagements and family gatherings to keep the peace with Michelle. As Jake's world shrank to revolve almost entirely around Michelle, her paranoia and possessiveness only intensified. She began to see threats to their relationship everywhere, in Jake's co-workers, in casual interactions with strangers, and especially in his family's attempts to maintain a connection with him. As Michelle's grip on Jake's life tightened, a part of him began to resist. The values instilled by his upbringing, the importance of family, the strength of long-standing friendships started to reassert themselves. This internal conflict came to a head on a chilly November evening, nearly a year into their relationship. Jake received a call from his sister, Lauren, informing him that their father had been hospitalized with a suspected heart attack. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed his keys, ready to rush to the hospital. Michelle, however, had other ideas. "Jake, you can't go," she pleaded. "We were supposed to have dinner together. You promised." Jake, torn between his worry for his father and his fear of upsetting Michelle, tried to reason with her. Michelle's face contorted with rage. "Your family again," she spat. "They're always trying to take you away from me. If you leave now, don't bother coming back." For the first time, Jake saw through the haze of manipulation. The absurdity of Michelle's demand in the face of a family emergency snapped something inside him. Without another word, he walked out the door, leaving Michelle screaming behind him. At the hospital, surrounded by the warmth and support of his family, Jake felt as if he was waking from a long, confusing dream. His father's condition, thankfully, turned out to be less serious than initially feared. As Jake sat in the waiting room, his mother gently broached the subject they had all been avoiding. Jake, his defenses weakened by the night's events, finally opened up. He shared with his mother the extent of Michelle's controlling behavior, her jealousy, and her attempts to isolate him. Sarah listened, her heart breaking for her son, but also relieved that he was finally seeing the truth. Over the next few days, as his father recovered, Jake spent more time with his family. He reconnected with friends he had neglected, realizing how much he had missed their company. Michelle's incessant calls and messages went unanswered, as Jake took time to reflect on their relationship. When Jake finally returned to the apartment he shared with Michelle, he was resolved to end things. Michelle, however, sensed the shift in Jake's demeanor and launched into a preemptive attack. "It's your mother, isn't it? She's turned you against me. I knew she hated me." Michelle's words devolved into a torrent of abuse aimed at Jake's family, particularly his mother. "Jake, I can't do this anymore. I won't cut my family out of my life for you or anyone else." As Jake turned to leave, Michelle's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Jake left, shaken but determined, unaware of the chilling prophecy contained in Michelle's parting words. The events of March 15, 2019 would forever be etched in the memories of Queenstown's residents. It began as an ordinary Friday, people hurrying to work, children boarding school buses, the usual rhythm of small-town life in full swing. For Sarah Brendan, it started as a day like any other, filled with routine tasks and errands. Sarah had just returned home from her morning yoga class, her mind preoccupied with plans for the weekend. Jake had promised to come over for a family dinner on Sunday, the first in months, and Sarah was determined to make it special. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street, but thought nothing of it. Humming softly, Sarah unlocked her front door and stepped inside, her arms laden with groceries. She didn't notice the shadow that detached itself from the side of the house and silently followed her in. Michelle Marsters, her eyes wild with a manic gleam, had been waiting for hours. In her delusional state, she had convinced herself that Sarah was the root of all her problems. Remove Sarah, she thought, and Jake would be hers completely. As Sarah bent to set her bags on the kitchen counter, Michelle struck. With a guttural cry of rage, she brought a heavy cast-iron skillet, grabbed from Sarah's own kitchen, crashing down on the woman's head. Sarah crumpled to the floor, dazed and disoriented. Blood trickled from a gash on her scalp. Michelle, consumed by her frenzy, didn't stop. She brought the skillet down again and again, Sarah's weak attempts at self-defense growing feebler with each blow. When it was over, Michelle stood panting over Sarah's motionless form. Blood spattered her clothes and face. In Michelle's twisted mind, she had done what was necessary. She had eliminated the threat to her relationship with Jake. Now, she reasoned, he would have no choice but to turn to her for comfort and support. With a clinical detachment that would later disturb even seasoned investigators, Michelle set about staging the scene. She ransacked the house, overturning furniture and emptying drawers, creating the illusion of a robbery gone wrong. She pocketed Sarah's jewelry and cash, planning to dispose of them later. In the bathroom, Michelle scrubbed the blood from her skin and changed into clean clothes she had brought with her. She wrapped her stained garments and the skillet in a plastic bag, intending to discard them far from the scene. As a final touch, Michelle used Sarah's own phone to send a text to Jake. "Looking forward to Sunday dinner, sweetheart. Love you." It was a chilling detail that would later send shivers down the spines of those involved in the case. Confident that she had covered her tracks, Michelle left the Brendan home as quietly as she had entered. To any passers-by, she would have looked like any other young woman going about her day, not someone who had just committed a brutal murder. Michelle drove to a remote area outside of town, where she burned her bloodied clothes and tossed the skillet into a deep pond. Returning to her apartment, Michelle began to craft her alibi. She called a friend, chatting normally about weekend plans. She posted on social media, careful to establish a timeline that placed her far from the Brendan home at the time of the murder. Then she waited. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Michelle's phone rang. It was Jake, his voice cracking with emotion. "Michelle," he sobbed, "something terrible has happened. It's my mom, she's dead." Michelle's performance was Oscar-worthy. She gasped in shock, her voice filled with false concern and sympathy. "Oh my God, Jake, what happened? Are you okay? Where are you? I'm coming right over." Everything was going according to plan. Soon, she thought, Jake would be utterly dependent on her. The discovery of Sarah Brendan's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community. Jake, worried when his mother didn't answer his calls about Sunday dinner, had driven to her house to check on her. The scene that greeted him would haunt him for years to come. Detective Lisa Martinez, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. From the moment she stepped into the Brendan home, something about the scene didn't sit right with her. While it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, certain details nagged at her experienced instincts. The house had been ransacked, true, but in a way that seemed almost methodical, rather than the chaotic ransacking typical of a panicked burglar. Valuable electronics were left untouched, while jewelry and cash were missing. Most tellingly, there were no signs of forced entry. As the forensics team combed through the house, Detective Martinez began the painful process of interviewing the family. Jake, still in shock, could barely string together coherent sentences. His father, recently released from the hospital, was devastated and confused. It was Jake's sister Lauren who provided the first piece of the puzzle that would ultimately lead to Michelle. Detective Lauren said, "I don't know if this is important, but Jake's girlfriend, Michelle, she's been acting really strange lately. She seemed obsessed with Jake, always trying to keep him away from us." Martinez's interest was piqued. She gently probed for more information, and Lauren opened up about the gradual isolation Jake had experienced, the tension between Michelle and their mother, and the recent confrontation that had led to Jake spending more time with his family. The detective's suspicions grew as she interviewed Jake's friends and coworkers. A picture began to emerge of Michelle as a controlling, paranoid partner who had systematically attempted to cut Jake off from his support network. However, suspicion was not proof, and Martinez knew she needed hard evidence. Forensics provided the next breakthrough. Despite the killer's efforts to clean up, trace amounts of blood were found in areas inconsistent with the location of Sarah's body. DNA analysis would later confirm it was a mix of Sarah's blood and the killer's. Moreover, fibers found on Sarah's clothing didn't match anything in her home. Martinez's team began the painstaking process of checking traffic cameras and interviewing neighbors. One elderly woman recalled seeing a car similar to Michelle's parked on the street the morning of the murder, but couldn't be certain. As the investigation progressed, Martinez brought Michelle in for questioning. Michelle arrived at the station projecting an image of concern and cooperation, but the detective's trained eye noted the subtle signs of anxiety, the slight tremor in her hands, the occasional darting of her eyes. "Michelle," Martinez began, her tone casual, "can you tell me where you were on the morning of March 15th? Michelle's response was smooth, rehearsed. She claimed to have been at a local cafe, working on her latest writing project. She even produced a receipt as proof, but something about her story didn't add up. Martinez decided to take a risk. "Michelle," she said, leaning forward, "we have a witness who saw your car near the Brendan home on the morning of the murder. Want to revise your statement?" Michelle's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of panic in her eyes, a slight hitch in her breathing. She quickly recovered, vehemently denying the accusation, but Martinez had seen enough. The investigation was far from over, but Martinez felt they were on the right track. Little did she know that the case was about to break wide open, thanks to an unexpected source, Jake himself. In the days following his mother's murder, Jake Brendan found himself in a fog of grief and confusion. Michelle was a constant presence, offering comfort and support. As the initial shock began to wear off, Jake started to notice inconsistencies in Michelle's behavior that gnawed at him. It was a small thing that first aroused his suspicions. While looking for a photo of his mother for the funeral service, Jake came across Michelle's journal. Normally, he would have respected her privacy, but a nagging feeling prompted him to open it. What he found chilled him to the bone. Page after page was filled with increasingly paranoid and violent rants about his mother. "Sarah's trying to turn him against me. She has to be stopped. I'm the only one who truly loves him." The last entry, dated the day before the murder, read simply, "Tomorrow I'll fix everything." He wanted to dismiss the idea, but too many pieces were falling into place. Michelle's obsessive behavior, her hatred of his mother, her insistence on being with him constantly since the murder. Torn between his loyalty to Michelle and his growing suspicions, Jake decided to confide in Detective Martinez. He brought the journal to the police station, his hands shaking as he handed it over. "I think Michelle might have had something to do with my mom's death." Martinez's team quickly obtained a warrant to search Michelle and Jake's apartment. Hidden in the back of a closet, they found a bag containing Sarah's missing jewelry. In a stroke of luck, the pond where Michelle had disposed of the murder weapon had been partially drained for maintenance. revealing the blood-stained skillet. As the evidence mounted, Michelle's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Her alibi fell apart under scrutiny. The cafe receipt she had produced was for a different day, and security footage showed her car leaving town in the direction of the Brendan home on the morning of the murder. Jake, grappling with the betrayal and the horrifying realization of what Michelle had done, agreed to cooperate with the police. In a recorded phone call, he confronted Michelle about his suspicions. Caught off guard, Michelle's responses were incriminating. "Why did you do it, Michelle? I loved you." Michelle's response was chilling in its delusion. "I did it for us, Jake," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Your mother was trying to keep us apart. Now we can be together forever. Don't you see? It was the only way." With this final piece of evidence, Detective Martinez moved to make an arrest. The stage was set for Michelle's arrest, but even Martinez couldn't have predicted the dramatic turn of events that would unfold as they moved to take her into custody. Michelle, unaware that her world was about to come crashing down, was inside a bookstore. Martinez had decided on a public arrest to minimize the risk of Michelle doing something desperate. As Michelle exited the store, two plainclothes officers approached her casually. "Michelle Marsters?" One of them said, "We need you to come with us." For a moment, Michelle froze, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, she turned and ran. She made it only a few steps before Martinez tackled her to the ground. As the detective handcuffed her, Michelle began to scream. "You don't understand. I did it for love. Jake needs me." At the police station, Michelle was led to an interrogation room where Martinez was waiting. For hours, Michelle maintained her innocence, her story becoming increasingly convoluted as she tried to explain away the evidence. Martinez watched patiently, waiting for the right moment to break through Michelle's defenses. Finally, as exhaustion and the weight of her lies began to take their toll, Martinez played her trump card. She placed Jake's journal in front of Michelle. "Jake found your journal. He knows what you did." The effect was immediate. Michelle's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He wasn't supposed to find out," she whispered. "It was supposed to be our fresh start." What followed was a chilling confession that left even the seasoned detective shaken. Michelle described in vivid detail how she had planned and carried out Sarah's murder, her voice devoid of remorse as she recounted the brutal attack. "I had to do it," Michelle insisted, her eyes fever bright. "Sarah was poisoning Jake against me. She never understood our love. With her gone, Jake would need me. We would be together forever." When the confession was complete, Michelle seemed to deflate, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, suddenly sounding very young and afraid. The prosecutor presented a methodical, airtight case. She walked the jury through the evidence. The DNA found at the crime scene, the murder weapon recovered from the pond, the damning entries in Michelle's journal, and finally, Michelle's own recorded confession. Perhaps the most powerful moment of the prosecution's case came when Jake took the stand. His testimony was heart-wrenching, detailing the gradual isolation he experienced and his growing unease with Michelle's behavior. The defense faced an uphill battle. Given the overwhelming evidence, Stevenson opted for a mental health defense, arguing that Michelle's troubled background and psychological issues had left her incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. Psychiatrists took the stand, offering conflicting opinions on Michelle's mental state. Dr. Samantha Wright, testifying for the defense, diagnosed Michelle with borderline personality disorder and argued that her extreme fear of abandonment had driven her to commit the murder. Throughout the trial, Michelle sat at the defense table, often appearing detached from the proceedings. After a week-long trial, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned after just 6 hours with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Michelle finally broke her eerie calm, collapsing in sobs. Michelle Marsters, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, retreated into a world of fantasy behind bars. She continued to write, filling notebooks with stories of star-crossed lovers and tragic romances, unable or unwilling to fully grasp the reality of her crimes. For the residents of Queenstown, the case served as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from where we least expect them. It was a tragedy that would be remembered for years to come, a cautionary tale about the dark side of love and the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession. At the heart of this story are two couples. Isabella and Russell Hawthorne, both in their early 50s, had been fixtures of the community for over 2 decades. They were the couple everyone looked up to. Successful, well-respected, and seemingly happily married, their home was often the center of neighborhood gatherings. Just 3 houses down, the newly wedded Zara and Eric Donovan had recently moved in. Both in their mid-20s, they brought a youthful energy to the street that had long been dominated by older families and retirees. Their arrival was met with curiosity and warmth by their neighbors, particularly the Hawthornes. Little did anyone know that the lives of these 4 individuals would soon become entangled in a web of desire, obsession, and murder. What began as a daring experiment in sexual exploration would spiral into a nightmare that would leave one dead, one behind bars, and 2 others grappling with the consequences of their choices. This is the story of how a seemingly innocent proposition led to a brutal crime that would be splashed across national headlines and forever change the lives of those involved. It's a cautionary tale of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming individuals and the devastating consequences of stepping outside societal norms. Isabella Hawthorne had always been the golden girl. Growing up in Seattle, she was the captain of her high school cheerleading squad, prom queen and valedictorian. But Isabella was more than just a pretty face. She had a sharp mind and boundless ambition. She met Russell Hawthorne during her sophomore year at the University of Washington. Russell, 2 years her senior, was the star quarterback with a bright future ahead of him. Their courtship was the stuff of campus legend, the perfect couple that everyone envied. They married shortly after Isabella's graduation, with dreams of conquering the world together. Russell's promising football career was cut short by a knee injury in his first year as a professional player. He pivoted to sports management, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Isabella, meanwhile, pursued a career in marketing, her creativity and drive making her a rising star in the field. Their move coincided with the birth of their daughter, Lily. They threw themselves into parenthood and their careers with equal fervor. From the outside, they seemed to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But as the years went by, cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Russell's work kept him away from home for longer stretches, and he began to put on weight, losing the athletic physique that had first attracted Isabella. For her part, Isabella found herself increasingly restless. With Lily away at college, the house felt empty, and her job no longer provided the satisfaction it once did. Isabella began to wonder if this was all there was to life. She started yoga classes and joined a book club, searching for something to fill the growing void she felt. She found herself envying the young couples she saw, with their passionate embraces and carefree laughter. When was the last time she and Russell had shared such moments? Russell, oblivious to his wife's discontent, continued his routine of long hours at the office, followed by evenings in front of the TV with a beer in hand. Their conversations became perfunctory, limited to discussions about bills, home maintenance, and occasional updates about Lily. As her 50th birthday approached, Isabella felt a growing sense of panic. Was this how she would spend the rest of her life? The woman who had once been voted most likely to succeed now felt trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. It was in this state of mind that Isabella first laid eyes on Eric Donovan. Young, handsome, with a lean swimmer's build, Eric represented everything that was missing from Isabella's life: excitement, passion, and the promise of adventure. For the first time in years, Isabella felt a stirring of desire. As she watched Eric and his young wife Zara move into the neighborhood, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that would change everything. Zara Donovan, born Zara Khalil, was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had settled in Portland 2 decades earlier. Growing up, she had always felt caught between 2 worlds: the traditional values of her parents and the liberal, free-spirited culture of the Pacific Northwest. With her olive skin, Zara stood out in a city that was predominantly white. From a young age, Zara showed a passion for art. Her parents, while supportive, always emphasized the importance of a practical career. As a compromise, Zara studied graphic design at Portland State University, finding a way to merge her creative instincts with a marketable skill. It was during her final year at PSU that Zara met Eric Donovan. She was working on her thesis project at a local coffee shop when Eric, a barista there, struck up a conversation about her sketches. Eric, with his easy charm and boyish good looks, immediately captured Zara's attention. Eric had grown up in a small town in rural Oregon, the youngest of 4 boys in a working-class family. He'd moved to Portland 3 years earlier, drawn by the city's vibrant art scene and progressive culture. While he worked as a barista to pay the bills, his true passion was photography. His Instagram account, filled with moody black and white portraits in stark urban landscapes, had a modest but growing following. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within weeks of their first meeting, Eric and Zara were inseparable. They spent their days exploring Portland's hidden gems, secret gardens, underground art galleries, hole-in-the-wall music venues. Eric introduced Zara to urban exploration, and she in turn taught him about Lebanese cuisine and culture. To Zara, Eric represented freedom and self-expression. He encouraged her to pursue her art without compromise, to break free from the expectations of her family and society. With Eric, Zara felt seen and understood in a way she never had before. For Eric, Zara was his muse and his anchor. Her quiet strength and unwavering support gave him the confidence to pursue his photography more seriously. He began to book small gigs, weddings, local band promotional shots, even a few magazine spreads. Their decision to get married came as a surprise to many who knew them. Both sets of parents expressed concern about the speed of their relationship, but Eric and Zara were convinced they had found their soulmates. They had a small ceremony in a sculpture garden, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The move was a practical decision. As freelancers, they needed a space that could serve as both home and studio. The quiet suburb offered affordable housing, close enough to the city for work opportunities. They saw it as the perfect place to start their life together, envisioning lazy Sunday mornings in their backyard and cozy evenings planning their future. Little did they know that their new neighborhood held secrets and temptations that would test the strength of their young love. As they unpacked boxes in their new home, neither Eric nor Zara could have imagined the turmoil that lay ahead, or the devastating consequences their choices would have. The annual summer block party was a tradition that dated back decades. Every year on the last Saturday of August, Sycamore Lane would transform into a bustling fairground of sorts. Neighbors would bring out grills, coolers full of drinks, and folding tables laden with potluck dishes. Children would run around with water guns and bubble wands, while adults caught up on neighborhood gossip and sipped cold beers. This year's party held a special significance for the residents of Sycamore Lane. It was the official welcome for the Donovans, the street's newest additions. Isabella Hawthorne, as the unofficial social director of the neighborhood, had taken it upon herself to ensure that Zara and Eric felt welcomed. As the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the street, Isabella made her way to the Donovans, who were standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. "Isabella, you look lovely," Russell called out as she walked past, her sundress floating around her legs. She flashed him a smile, but her eyes were already fixed on Eric. "Eric and Zara, welcome to the neighborhood," Isabella said warmly, air-kissing Zara's cheeks and letting her hand linger perhaps a moment too long on Eric's arm. "We're so glad you could join us." The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by the fruity sangria Isabella had brought along. Zara found herself drawn into a discussion about local art galleries with some of the other neighbors, while Eric and Isabella drifted towards the Hawthorns' front yard. "You have a beautiful home," Eric commented, his eyes roving over the house. Isabella beamed with pride. "Why, thank you," she replied. "You should see the inside. We recently renovated the master bathroom. Perhaps I could give you a tour sometime. Get you some ideas for your own place?" The flirtatious undertone in Isabella's voice was unmistakable. Eric, slightly taken aback but not displeased, felt a flush creep up his neck. Before he could respond, Russell appeared, clapping a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Hope my wife isn't talking your ear off, son." Russell chuckled. Isabella shot him a look that mixed annoyance and affection. "Actually, she was just offering to show me your renovation," Eric said, his voice slightly strained. As the evening wore on, the two couples found themselves gravitating towards each other. Zara, charmed by Russell's dad jokes and genuine interest in her artwork, found herself relaxing for the first time since moving in. Isabella, meanwhile, hung on Eric's every word as he described his photography projects. By the time the party wound down, seeds had been planted. Seeds of attraction, curiosity, and temptation that would soon grow into something none of them could have anticipated. It was a week after the block party that Isabella first broached the subject with Russell. They were in bed, the TV droning in the background, when Isabella turned to her husband with a mischievous glint in her eye. Isabella broached the subject with Russell one night as they lay in bed. Her voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of excitement as she asked if he had ever considered spicing up their love life. Russell, half asleep, mumbled incoherently at first. Isabella pressed on, clarifying that she meant specifically in the bedroom. This caught Russell's attention and he became suddenly alert. Cautiously, Russell asked what exactly she had in mind. Isabella took a deep breath before suggesting they try swapping partners with another couple. The silence that followed her proposal was deafening. Russell stared at his wife, trying to determine if she was serious. As he realized she was, a mix of emotions played across his face: shock, intrigue, and a hint of arousal. Over the next few days, the Hawthorns had numerous discussions about Isabella's proposition. Russell, initially hesitant, found himself warming to the idea. The thought of being with a younger woman stirred something in him he thought had long since died. It was Isabella who finally suggested the Donovans. They're young, attractive, and new to the area, she reasoned. They might be open to something like this. Approaching the younger couple proved to be a delicate matter. It was at a neighborhood barbecue that Isabella, emboldened by several glasses of wine, pulled Zara aside. The conversation was awkward at first, with Isabella dancing around the subject, but once the proposition was laid out, Zara's reaction surprised her. Instead of outrage or disgust, there was curiosity in the younger woman's eyes. The evening of the swap arrived with a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. The Hawthorns had suggested using their home, citing their finished basement as a perfect, private setting. As Zara and Eric walked up the driveway hand in hand, Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Are we really doing this?" He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but she could see the apprehension in his eyes as well. Isabella greeted them at the door, her smile a little too bright, her laugh a little too loud. The forced casualness of the situation was palpable as they made small talk over glasses of expensive red wine. Russell busied himself with the stereo, filling the room with soft jazz in an attempt to ease the tension. After what seemed like an eternity of awkward conversation, Isabella finally stood up. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "shall we?" They had agreed beforehand on the pairings, Isabella with Eric, Russell with Zara. As they split off, Zara couldn't help but glance back at Eric, a moment of uncertainty passing between them. But then Eric disappeared down the hallway with Isabella, and Zara found herself alone with Russell. Russell led Zara to the guest bedroom, his hand gentle on the small of her back. Despite his earlier bravado, he felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. It had been years since he'd been with anyone other than Isabella. Zara, sensing his hesitation, took the initiative. She reached up and kissed him softly, then more passionately. Russell responded, his hands exploring her young, firm body with growing confidence. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Isabella was living out the fantasies she'd been harboring since she first laid eyes on Eric. His youthful energy and enthusiasm more than made up for any lack of experience. Isabella felt desired, beautiful, alive in a way she hadn't in years. Eric, for his part, was intoxicated by Isabella's confidence and sensuality. As the encounters reached their climax, a series of emotions washed over each participant. Excitement, pleasure, guilt, and an unexpected emptiness all mingled together in a confusing cocktail. Afterwards, as they all reconvened in the living room, an awkward silence fell over the group. The reality of what they had done seemed to hit them all at once. Zara couldn't meet Eric's eyes, focusing instead on smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Russell cleared his throat several times, but couldn't seem to find any words. Only Isabella seemed truly at ease, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was Eric who finally broke the silence. "Well," he said, his attempt at a casual tone falling flat. That was something. The tension broke and nervous laughter filled the room. They made stilted small talk for a few more minutes before the Donovans made their excuses and left. As Zara and Eric walked home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, they were unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their relationships. Back in the Hawthorne house, Isabella hummed to herself as she cleaned up, already thinking about the next time. Russell watched her, a nagging feeling of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. None of them realized that this night was just the beginning, the first step down a path that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. In the days following the swap, Life seemed to return to normal, but beneath the surface, changes were brewing, particularly in Eric Donovan. Eric found himself unable to stop thinking about Isabella. The encounter had awakened something in him, a hunger he'd never experienced before. He began to find excuses to be outside when he knew Isabella would be leaving for work. He'd wave, trying to appear casual, but his eyes would linger on her long after she'd driven away. Zara noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. Eric seemed distracted, often lost in thought. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he was either too tired or not in the mood. Their once passionate lovemaking became infrequent and mechanical. One afternoon, Zara came home early from a client meeting to find Eric's photography workspace in disarray. As she began to tidy up, she noticed something odd. Hidden beneath a stack of prints was a folder filled with photos of Isabella. Some were clearly taken from a distance, capturing Isabella gardening, getting her mail, or walking to her car. Others were more intimate, zoomed-in shots through windows, Isabella in various states of undress. Zara felt her stomach churn. This wasn't just a harmless crush or the after effects of their encounter. This was something much more sinister. Meanwhile, Isabella had begun to notice Eric's increased presence in her daily life. At first, she was flattered by the attention, even reciprocating with flirtatious glances and accidental touches when they'd run into each other. But as the days wore on, Eric's behavior became more erratic and intense. He began sending her messages at all hours, alternating between passionate declarations of love and angry accusations. When she didn't respond quickly enough, Isabella tried to let him down gently, explaining that their encounter was a one-time thing, but Eric refused to accept it. One night, Isabella woke to the sound of something hitting her bedroom window. Peering out, she saw Eric standing in her front yard, a handful of pebbles in his hand. His eyes, wild and unfocused, locked onto hers. "I can't live without you, Isabella," he called out, his voice breaking. "We're meant to be together." Isabella quickly closed the curtains, her heart racing. She woke Russell, who grumbled as he went to confront Eric. By the time Russell made it outside, Eric had disappeared into the night, leaving only a crumpled bouquet of flowers on the front step. As Isabella lay awake that night, she realized with growing horror that her exciting sexual experiment had unleashed something dark and dangerous. She had no idea how right she was, or how tragic the consequences would be. Over the next few weeks, Eric's behavior spiraled further out of control. His obsession with Isabella consumed every aspect of his life. He neglected his photography business, spending hours stalking Isabella's social media accounts and driving by her house. Zara watched helplessly as her husband transformed into someone she barely recognized. Isabella, for her part, vacillated between fear and a perverse excitement. Part of her was terrified of Eric's growing instability, but another part, a part she was ashamed to admit existed, was thrilled by his obsessive attention. It made her feel desirable, powerful in a way she hadn't in years. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Isabella returned home to find Eric sitting in her living room. "How did you get in here?" she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Eric smiled, a cold, unsettling expression that sent chills down Isabella's spine. "You gave me a key, remember? For watering the plants when you were on vacation." Isabella's mind raced. That had been months ago, before the swap, before everything had gone wrong. She should have asked for it back. Why hadn't she asked for it back? Eric stood, moving towards her with predatory grace. "We need to talk, Isabella," he said, his voice low and intense. "About us, about our future together." Isabella backed away, fumbling for her phone. "There is no us, Eric," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave." But Eric kept advancing, his eyes wild with a mixture of love and madness. "You don't mean that," he insisted. "I know you feel what I feel. We're destined to be together, Isabella. I won't let anyone come between us." As Eric reached for her, Isabella let out a scream. The sound seemed to snap Eric out of his trance. He blinked, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. Without another word, he brushed past Isabella and out the front door. Shaking, Isabella collapsed onto the couch. She knew she should call the police, but what would she say? That she'd willingly slept with her young neighbor, and now he was stalking her. The thought of the scandal, of everyone knowing what she'd done, was unbearable. Little did Isabella know, her silence would have devastating consequences. For in his twisted mind, Eric took her failure to report him as a sign of her secret love, and he was determined to eliminate any obstacles standing in their way, no matter the cost. The tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Isabella was alone in her house, Russell having left for a golf game with friends. She was in the kitchen, mindlessly flipping through a magazine when she heard the back door open. Isabella called out with a trembling voice, asking if it was Eric. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Her heart racing, Isabella grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it out in front of her like a shield. When Eric appeared in the doorway, his eyes were glazed and unfocused, and he reeked of alcohol. He slurred that he had seen Russell drive away, declaring that now they could be together as they were supposed to be. Isabella pleaded with Eric, telling him he needed help and that this wasn't right, but she couldn't finish her sentence. Eric wasn't listening. He lunged forward, trying to grab Isabella. She shrieked and swung the knife wildly, connecting with Eric's arm and drawing blood. The sight of his own blood seemed to enrage Eric further. He roared an insult at her and charged again. In the ensuing struggle, the knife clattered to the floor. Eric's hands found Isabella's throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Isabella clawed at his face, gasping for air as her vision began to darken around the edges. In desperation, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with Eric's groin. The blow caused him to double over in pain, releasing his grip on her throat. Isabella scrambled away, her fingers closing around the handle of the fallen knife. As Eric straightened up, his face contorted with rage, Isabella acted on pure instinct. She thrust the knife forward, feeling it sink into Eric's chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Eric looked down at the knife protruding from his body, a look of surprise replacing the anger on his face. Then slowly he crumpled to the floor. Isabella stared at Eric's still form, the reality of what she'd done crashing over her. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. The quiet of the community was shattered by the wail of sirens as police cars and an ambulance converged on the Hawthorne residence. Neighbors poured out onto their front lawns, watching in shock as paramedics rushed into the house, only to emerge shortly after, shaking their heads grimly. Detective Liam Reeves, a veteran of the Portland Police Department, arrived on the scene to find a distraught Isabella Hawthorne being questioned by officers. Her hands and clothes were stained with blood, her eyes wild with shock and fear. As Reeves approached, he overheard snippets of Isabella's statement. She was saying that Eric had attacked her, that she had no choice, and expressing shock and disbelief at what she had done. Reeves took charge of the scene, ordering a thorough search of the house and surrounding area, while crime scene technicians combed through the kitchen, photographing the bloody knife and the signs of struggle. Reeves turned his attention to the neighbors. Zara Donovan stood at the edge of the police tape, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Reeves approached her gently, introducing himself as Detective Reeves and confirming that the victim was her husband. Zara nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. When Reeves pressed her about when she had last seen Eric, Zara managed to choke out that it had been that morning. She explained that Eric had said he was going for a walk, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to process the situation. Unable to continue, she broke down sobbing. Reeves made a note in his pad before moving on to question other neighbors. As he gathered more information, a story began to emerge of a quiet neighborhood rocked by an unthinkable crime. As the body of Eric Donovan was wheeled out on a gurney, covered by a sheet, Reeves couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than a simple home invasion gone wrong. The look in Isabella Hawthorne's eyes, a mixture of relief and guilt, told him that unraveling the truth would be a complex and delicate process. In the days following Eric's death, Detective Reeves dove deep into the lives of both the Hawthornes and the Donovans. What he uncovered was a tangled web of secrets and lies that painted a very different picture from the initial reports of a random break-in. Interviews with neighbors revealed whispers of an illicit affair between Isabella and Eric. Cell phone records showed an overwhelming number of calls and messages from Eric to Isabella in the weeks leading up to the incident, many of which had gone unanswered. But it was the discovery of Eric's photography studio that blew the case wide open. Hidden among his professional equipment, detectives found a camera with a high-powered zoom lens and memory cards filled with hundreds of photos of Isabella, many taken without her knowledge. When confronted with this evidence, Zara broke down. Through tears, she revealed the truth about the partner swap and the subsequent obsession that had gripped her husband. She spoke of Eric's erratic behavior, his neglect of their marriage, and her own fears about his mental state. Isabella, faced with the mounting evidence, finally confessed to the full story. She admitted to the affair and the stalking, but maintained that the final confrontation had been self-defense. Russell, devastated by his wife's infidelity, nonetheless stood by her side throughout the ordeal. As Reeves pieced together the events that led to that fatal Sunday afternoon, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. What had begun as a misguided attempt to spice up a stagnant marriage had spiraled into an obsession that cost a young man his life and forever changed the lives of all involved. The case, once thought to be a straightforward home invasion, was now revealed to be a complex tale of desire, betrayal, and deadly obsession. The prosecution painted Isabella as a bored housewife who initiated an affair with a younger man, then killed him to keep her indiscretion secret. They emphasized the premeditated nature of her actions, pointing to the convenient absence of her husband on the day of the killing. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Simone Jeffries, argued passionately that Isabella was a victim of stalking and harassment who acted in self-defense. They presented evidence of Eric's obsessive behavior and called expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of stalking on victims. Zara's testimony proved to be a turning point in the trial. Her emotional account of Eric's descent into obsession and her own fear for Isabella's safety swayed many jurors. "She's not the monster they're making her out to be," Zara said through tears. "Eric, he wasn't himself at the end. What happened is a tragedy, but Isabella was as much a victim as anyone." In his closing arguments, the prosecutor urged the jury not to be swayed by emotion. "The facts are clear," he insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne made a series of choices that led to this tragic outcome. She must be held accountable." Simone Jeffries, in her rebuttal, appealed to the jury's sense of empathy. "Put yourself in Isabella's shoes," she implored. Terrified, alone, confronted by a man who had been stalking her for weeks, she did what anyone would do. She fought for her life. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The fate of Isabella Hawthorne and the final judgment on this suburban tragedy now rested in their hands. Isabella Hawthorne was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. As Isabella was led away from the courtroom, the impact of the tragedy on all involved was palpable. Russell Hawthorne, his face haggard from the stress of the trial, watched his wife disappear through the courtroom doors. Despite the revelations of her infidelity, he had stood by her throughout the ordeal. Now he faced the prospect of years alone, grappling with the consequences of their ill-fated experiment. Sarah Donovan, widowed and alone, retreated from public life. The trauma of losing Eric and the public exposure of their private lives left deep scars. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of haunting paintings that would later be hailed as a powerful exploration of grief and betrayal. The residents struggled to come to terms with the events that had shattered their peaceful community. The Hawthorne and Donovan houses stood empty, constant reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Some neighbors moved away, unable to bear the memories. Those who stayed found their trust in one another irrevocably altered. Sebastian Thompson, a successful businessman, and Hazel, his homemaker wife, had been married for 15 years. Their marriage, once vibrant, had been faltering, prompting them to seek professional help. They enrolled in a retreat led by the renowned Dr. David Green, a charismatic therapist with a reputation for mending fractured relationships. On the 4th night of the retreat, Sebastian was found dead in their cabin. His death, initially appearing as a tragic accident, soon revealed darker undertones. The investigation uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green, hidden from everyone but the two, was a catalyst for the events that unfolded. Dr. Green, once a beacon of hope for struggling couples, was now at the center of a murder investigation. His charming exterior masked a manipulative mind with financial motives. As the truth unraveled, it became clear that Sebastian's death was no accident, but a coldly orchestrated murder. This true crime story delves into the complex relationships, personal histories, and the sinister plot that led to Sebastian Thompson's untimely death. It examines the psychological manipulation employed by Dr. Green, the emotional turmoil of Hazel, and the meticulous investigation that brought the truth to light. This is the chilling account of a couple's therapy retreat that turned deadly, revealing the dark side of love and trust.
The couple's therapy retreat was situated in a secluded, luxurious cabin in the mountains.
Surrounded by dense forests and picturesque views, the location was chosen to provide an escape from the daily stresses of life, offering a peaceful environment conducive to healing and introspection. As Sebastian and Hazel Thompson arrived at the retreat, they were greeted by Dr. David Green. With his warm smile and reassuring presence, he exuded confidence and empathy, instantly putting the participants at ease. Alongside Sebastian and Hazel, there were 3 other couples, each grappling with their own issues. The retreat kicked off with a group session, where each couple introduced themselves and shared their reasons for attending. Sebastian, tall and well-built, spoke with a hint of frustration in his voice. He expressed his desire to rekindle the love and trust that had diminished over the years. Hazel, petite and attractive, echoed his sentiments, though her eyes betrayed a deeper, unspoken sadness. Dr. Green facilitated the sessions with skill and sensitivity, creating an atmosphere of openness and vulnerability. He emphasized the importance of honest communication and trust, urging couples to confront their issues head-on. The initial sessions were intense, with emotions running high as old wounds were reopened. Sebastian and Hazel's interactions were Sebastianed by underlying tension. Sebastian's controlling nature clashed with Hazel's growing sense of independence. Their exchanges were fraught with resentment and unspoken accusations. Dr. Green seemed particularly attentive to their case, often singling them out for deeper analysis. In private sessions, the dynamics were different. Dr. Green focused on building rapport, carefully listening to their individual grievances. He offered Hazel a sympathetic ear, understanding her feelings of entrapment and frustration. For Sebastian, he played the role of a stern yet caring advisor, urging him to let go of his controlling tendencies. The other couples at the retreat observed the palpable tension between Sebastian and Hazel. They noticed how Dr. Green seemed to give Hazel more attention, often engaging her in deeper conversations. This did not go unnoticed by Sebastian, who began to feel a growing sense of unease. The retreat's idyllic setting provided a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The towering pines and serene lake seemed to mock the chaos within the hearts of the participants. As the days progressed, the initial hope for reconciliation gave way to a sense of impending doom. Sebastian and Hazel's relationship, instead of healing, seemed to be unraveling further. Dr. Green's presence, once a source of comfort, became a point of contention. The other couples, too, began to sense that something was amiss, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. As the retreat moved into its 3rd day, the tension reached a boiling point. The stage was set for a tragic turn of events that would shatter the tranquil facade of the retreat and expose the dark secrets lurking beneath. Sebastian Thompson's life was a testament to hard work and ambition. Born into a middle-class family, he had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and relentless effort. By the age of 45, he had secured a high-ranking position at a prestigious firm, earning a handsome salary and enjoying the perks of success. However, his professional achievements came at a cost. The long hours and constant pressure strained his personal life, creating a rift between him and Hazel. Sebastian's control issues stemmed from his desire for perfection. He demanded the best from himself and those around him, often leading to conflicts at home. His need to control every aspect of his life extended to his marriage, where he expected Hazel to conform to his ideals. This created a suffocating environment for Hazel, who felt increasingly trapped in a role she hadn't chosen. Hazel Thompson, in contrast, had led a more sheltered life. Growing up in a small town, she had married Sebastian young and dedicated herself to being a supportive wife and homemaker. Initially, she found fulfillment in this role, but as the years passed, she began to feel a deep sense of dissatisfaction. The love and attention she once received from Sebastian had dwindled, replaced by criticism and control. Hazel's discontent grew as she watched her husband thrive in his career, while her own aspirations were stifled. She longed for freedom, for a chance to explore her own identity outside the confines of her marriage. It was during this time of vulnerability that she met Dr. David Green. Dr. Green's background was shrouded in mystery. He was a charismatic figure, known for his ability to connect with people on a deep emotional level. His reputation as a skilled therapist had earned him a loyal following, and his retreats were highly sought after. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a manipulative mind. Dr. Green had a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. His charm and intelligence masked a dark side that few were aware of. He had a knack for identifying those who were emotionally fragile and used their insecurities to his advantage. Financial gain was a significant motivator for him, but so was the thrill of control. Hazel's vulnerability and dissatisfaction made her an easy target for Dr. Green. He began their affair with calculated precision, offering her the attention and validation she craved. Their interactions started innocently enough, with late-night conversations and sympathetic listening. Gradually, he intensified his influence, making Hazel dependent on his approval and guidance. Dr. Green's manipulation extended beyond the affair. He subtly planted seeds of doubt and resentment in Hazel's mind, exacerbating the existing tension in her marriage. He portrayed himself as the only one who truly understood her, driving a wedge between her and Sebastian. His ultimate goal was to remove Sebastian from the equation, both to deepen his control over Hazel and to gain financially. Sebastian, unaware of the affair, sensed a shift in Hazel's behavior. She became more distant and withdrawn, often disappearing for hours without explanation. His attempts to confront her were met with defensiveness and anger, further straining their relationship. He turned to Dr. Green for guidance, unaware that the man he trusted was orchestrating his downfall. Dr. Green's plan was meticulous. He exploited the trust placed in him by both Sebastian and Hazel, using their therapy sessions to manipulate their emotions. He created scenarios that heightened the conflict between them, pushing them to the brink. His aim was to drive Sebastian to a point of desperation where he could be easily eliminated. As the retreat progressed, Dr. Green's influence over Hazel grew stronger. She became increasingly reliant on him, viewing him as her savior from a life of misery. Her perception of Sebastian shifted from a loving husband to an oppressive figure, a change fueled by Dr. Green's constant manipulation. The stage was set for a tragic culmination. Sebastian's frustration and Hazel's growing dependence on Dr. Green created a volatile mix, primed for a deadly outcome. Dr. Green, ever the puppet master, watched as his plan unfolded, confident in his ability to control the narrative. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green began subtly, almost innocently. During the early sessions, Dr. Green took a special interest in Hazel, recognizing her vulnerability. He offered her a sympathetic ear and gentle words of encouragement, which she desperately needed. Their relationship escalated during private therapy sessions. Dr. Green's office, a cozy room with soft lighting and plush furniture, became a sanctuary for Hazel. She poured out her heart, sharing her frustrations and dreams. Dr. Green listened attentively, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers, making her feel seen and understood. Late-night conversations turned into secret rendezvous. They would meet in secluded spots around the retreat, hidden from the prying eyes of other participants. Their meetings were filled with whispered confessions and stolen kisses, each encounter deepening their bond. Hazel's internal conflict was intense. She felt a growing attachment to Dr. Green, yet guilt gnawed at her conscience. She loved Sebastian, or at least she thought she did. But the connection she felt with Dr. Green was unlike anything she had experienced. He made her feel alive, appreciated, and desired. Dr. Green, on the other hand, was playing a calculated game. He knew how to manipulate Hazel's emotions, feeding her insecurities and deepening her dependence on him. His motives were far from pure. Financial gain and control drove his actions. He saw Hazel not just as a lover, but as a pawn in his grander scheme. Their affair was a dangerous dance fraught with risk. Hazel's behavior became increasingly erratic, her guilt manifesting as anxiety and paranoia. She feared discovery, not just for the affair, but for the growing realization that Dr. Green had a hold over her that she couldn't break. One evening, as they met in a secluded part of the retreat, Dr. Green's true nature began to surface. He spoke of their future together, painting a picture of a life free from Sebastian's control. Hazel, caught in his web, began to believe in the possibility of a new life. However, the cost of this new life was steep, and the shadows of doubt began to creep into her mind. Dr. Green's manipulation extended to Sebastian as well. He planted seeds of suspicion, subtly suggesting that Hazel's behavior was a reaction to Sebastian's controlling nature. He urged Sebastian to be more understanding and patient, all the while knowing that his advice would only exacerbate the tension. As the retreat progressed, the affair became more intense, the secrecy heightening the thrill and the danger. One evening, during a particularly heated session, the tension boiled over. Sebastian, feeling cornered and misunderstood, lashed out verbally. He accused Hazel of not trying, of already giving up on their marriage. Hazel, instead of responding, looked to Dr. Green for support. This small gesture was the breaking point for Sebastian, his face contorted with a mixture of hurt and rage, and he stormed out of the session. Dr. Green seized the opportunity to further manipulate Hazel. He comforted her, emphasizing how Sebastian's behavior was proof of his controlling nature. Hazel, emotionally fragile and desperate for validation, absorbed Dr. Green's words, her trust in him growing stronger. The other couples were taken aback by Sebastian's outburst. They had their own issues, but none had witnessed such a dramatic confrontation. Dr. Green addressed the group, explaining that sometimes conflicts needed to be brought to the surface to be resolved. His explanation was met with nods of understanding, though doubts lingered. Sebastian, alone and seething, wandered the retreat grounds. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Hazel, not just to the problems in their marriage, but to Dr. Green himself. His mind raced with suspicions and fears, each thought more troubling than the last. He needed to find a way to reach Hazel, to break through the barriers that seemed to be growing between them. That night in their cabin, the atmosphere was tense and heavy with unspoken words. Sebastian tried to reach out to Hazel, to apologize and explain, but she was distant, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. The silence between them was deafening, a stark contrast to the arguments that had filled the past days. Dr. Green, watching from the shadows, felt a sense of triumph. His plan was unfolding perfectly. The tension between Sebastian and Hazel was at its peak, and the stage was set for the next phase of his scheme. He knew that Sebastian was close to breaking, and all he needed was one final push. As the retreat moved into its fourth day, the sense of impending doom grew stronger. The other couples, though unaware of the full extent of the turmoil, sensed that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Green maintained his facade of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a glint of anticipation. The stage was set for a tragic climax, one that would shatter the lives of those involved and expose the dark undercurrents that had been simmering beneath the surface. The tension, carefully cultivated by Dr. Green, was about to reach a deadly crescendo. The fourth night of the retreat was shrouded in an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, and a heavy fog rolled in, enveloping the cabin in a ghostly embrace. Sebastian and Hazel had retired to their room after another tense day, the silence between them more oppressive than ever. Around midnight, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The other couples, jolted from their sleep, rushed out of their rooms, confusion and fear etched on their faces. The source of the scream was unmistakable. It came from Sebastian and Hazel's cabin. Dr. Green, appearing composed yet concerned, quickly took charge. He directed the others to stay back while he entered the cabin. Inside, he found Hazel, pale and trembling, standing over Sebastian's lifeless body. The room was in disarray, signs of a struggle evident. Sebastian lay on the floor, his eyes wide open in a final expression of shock and pain. There were visible bruises on his neck, and a broken lamp lay nearby, its jagged edges stained with blood. Hazel, in a state of shock, kept muttering that she didn't know what happened, that she had woken up to find him like this. Dr. Green, masking his satisfaction, wrapped his arm around Hazel, guiding her away from the scene. He assured the other participants that he would handle the situation and contacted the local authorities. Within minutes, the tranquility of the retreat was shattered by the arrival of police and paramedics. The initial investigation pointed to foul play. The signs of struggle and the nature of Sebastian's injuries indicated a violent confrontation. Hazel, as the only other person in the room, became the prime suspect. She was taken into custody for questioning, her dazed state complicating the initial interrogation. Dr. Green, playing the role of the concerned therapist, vouched for Hazel. He explained to the police that she had been under immense stress and that Sebastian had been aggressive. He painted a picture of a woman pushed to her limits, subtly suggesting that she might have acted in self-defense. The police, while not entirely convinced, took Dr. Green's statements into account. They began piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Other participants were interviewed, and it became clear that the Thompsons' relationship had been in turmoil. The tension between them, coupled with Sebastian's controlling nature, provided a potential motive. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Hazel's account began to emerge. She couldn't clearly remember the events of the night, her memories a foggy jumble of fear and confusion. Her emotional state was fragile, and she seemed genuinely distraught over Sebastian's death. Dr. Green continued to support Hazel, maintaining his role as her confidant and protector. He provided the police with additional details, carefully crafting a narrative that supported his version of events. He portrayed Sebastian as a domineering husband, and Hazel as a victim driven to desperation. As the police delved deeper, they uncovered the affair between Hazel and Dr. Green. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. The affair provided a potential motive for Hazel, but it also raised questions about Dr. Green's involvement. His influence over Hazel was evident, and some investigators began to suspect that he might have had a hand in the events. Dr. Green, sensing the growing suspicion, remained calm and cooperative. He deflected attention from himself, emphasizing his role as a therapist trying to help a troubled couple. His charm and professionalism worked in his favor, but the police weren't entirely convinced. The discovery of the affair shifted the focus of the investigation. Hazel, now seen as both a suspect and a victim, faced intense scrutiny. Dr. Green, while not officially a suspect, was under the radar. The stage was set for a complex and convoluted investigation, with multiple layers of deception and manipulation to unravel. As the night wore on, the sense of tragedy and confusion deepened. Sebastian's death, initially seen as a tragic accident, now appeared to be a murder driven by hidden motives and dark secrets. The serene retreat had become the scene of a chilling crime, and the truth was far from clear. The police investigation into Sebastian Thompson's death quickly intensified. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the retreat the morning after the murder, determined to uncover the truth behind the tragic event. Detective Collins began by interviewing the other participants. Their accounts painted a picture of escalating tension between Sebastian and Hazel. Most of them mentioned Dr. Green's unusual interest in Hazel and his seemingly antagonistic stance towards Sebastian. The affair, already known to the police, became a focal point in her inquiry. In her interview with Hazel, Detective Collins noticed the woman's fragility and confusion. Hazel's account of the night was fragmented and inconsistent. She repeatedly claimed she couldn't remember what had happened, that she had woken up to find Sebastian dead. Her emotional distress seemed genuine, yet Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Hazel was involved. Dr. Green was interviewed next. He maintained his composed demeanor, offering a polished account of his interactions with Sebastian and Hazel. He admitted to the affair, describing it as a regrettable but understandable consequence of Hazel's unhappy marriage. He framed himself as a supportive figure, trying to help Hazel through her emotional turmoil. Despite his cooperative attitude, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Green was hiding something. His responses were too calculated, too perfect. She decided to delve deeper into his background, looking for any signs of past misconduct. The retreat's other participants provided further insights. Several of them mentioned the escalating arguments between Sebastian and Hazel, and a few noted that Dr. Green seemed to exacerbate these conflicts rather than resolve them. One participant, a woman named Rachel, mentioned overhearing a particularly heated argument between Sebastian and Hazel the night before the murder. Detective Collins followed up on Rachel's lead, examining the retreat's layout and the possibility of others hearing the argument. The cabin's isolated location made it unlikely that anyone outside could have heard, suggesting that Rachel might have been closer than she admitted. Collins began to consider the possibility of other witnesses or accomplices. The forensic team provided crucial evidence. The bruises on Sebastian's neck indicated strangulation, and the broken lamp suggested a violent struggle. However, there were no defensive wounds on Hazel, raising questions about her involvement in the physical altercation. The presence of an unidentified fingerprint on the lamp added another layer of mystery. As the investigation progressed, Collins discovered financial irregularities linked to Dr. Green. Large sums of money had been transferred from Hazel's account to an offshore account in Dr. Green's name. This revelation pointed to a clear financial motive, suggesting that Dr. Green had been manipulating Hazel not just emotionally, but financially as well. Armed with Hazel's partial recollection and the financial evidence, Detective Collins confronted Dr. Green. His calm facade cracked as he faced the mounting evidence. The fingerprint on the broken lamp, initially unidentified, was found to belong to Dr. Green. This evidence combined with Hazel's testimony and the financial trail, solidified the case against him. Dr. Green's manipulative tactics had backfired, leaving a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Foster, meticulously laid out the evidence against Dr. Green. They highlighted his manipulative tactics, the financial exploitation of Hazel, and the clear motive behind Sebastian's murder. Witnesses, including Hazel and other retreat participants, testified about the escalating tension and Dr. Green's undue influence. The jury, after deliberating for several hours, found Dr. Green guilty of first-degree murder and financial exploitation and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, the truth had been uncovered and justice had been served. The scars left behind were deep, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Hazel and the other survivors found a way to move forward, their experiences shaping a future where trust and healing could coexist.